Welcome back to Dark Sleep Radio. Tonight's story unfolds behind my property, where an ordinary fence repair turned into something far from routine. The night was unnaturally still, no wind, just heavy silence broken only by distant frog croaks from the creek. I was midway through fixing the old wire fence when the lanterns caught my attention. They weren't swinging naturally. These lanterns jerked sharply, flickering as if someone was manually shaking their flames. Stopping with my wrench in hand, I scanned the area. Everything was motionless. Then I saw it, a pale, bluish-white glow drifting along the horizon. At first, I tried rationalizing what I was seeing. Was it a vehicle? A plane? A distant train? But something was fundamentally wrong. The light moved deliberately, maintaining a constant distance, almost hovering parallel to the ridgeline. My flashlight beam couldn't penetrate this strange glow. It existed in its own separate realm of darkness, unaffected by my light. I tested this by switching the flashlight on and off, aiming it directly at the horizon. The glow remained unchanged, moving smoothly along the hills. I called out to my neighbor, hoping someone else might be witnessing this. Silence answered. The road below was empty, not a single car in sight. The lanterns continued flickering in an unsettling rhythm, like a heartbeat. Something was definitely not right. I knew this wasn't natural. Not a storm, not wildlife. Just an unexplainable presence, moving with an almost deliberate intelligence. As I stepped back, raising my hands as if to steady the world itself, the glow continued its steady, unnerving path. The lanterns caught my attention again, swinging toward the light one by one. It felt calculated, like something was measuring the distance, testing how far it could stretch the flames. Gripping the fence post, I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. My eyes kept tracking the pale glow drifting along the horizon. Within the light, I noticed subtle movements, almost imperceptible shifts that suggested an edge, a faint outline beyond just pure illumination. My heart began racing. I tried rationalizing it. Maybe a plane, an emergency helicopter, or a distant town's reflection. But nothing matched up. The motion was too smooth, almost intelligent, and completely silent. The night remained undisturbed. No engine hums, no wing rustlings, nothing. Just those swinging lanterns and a glow moving along the ridge with an eerily deliberate rhythm. I started walking along the fence, never breaking my gaze. As I moved, the glow seemed to adjust, maintaining its relative position. Eventually, I crouched behind a bush to observe more closely. A cloud passed overhead, temporarily casting shadows on the hills. When it cleared, the glow hadn't altered its course at all. It wasn't affected by shadows or changing light. It simply existed. Something about it was intensely compelling, making my muscles tense and my stomach churn. I thought I could see shapes, maybe limbs, maybe jagged edges, but nothing was ever truly clear. It was more suggestion than substance, as if my mind was desperately trying to fill in the blanks. After what seemed like 15 minutes, something strange happened. The lanterns suddenly stopped swinging, freezing mid-air, like time had been suspended. Then they slowly returned to their original motion. I expected the glow to disappear with this movement, but it continued drifting steadily along the ridge. Grabbing my phone, I attempted to capture a photo. The moment I pointed and tapped the screen, the glow seemed to shrink and recoil. Then, just like that, it vanished. No trail, no flicker, nothing. The horizon returned to its familiar black emptiness, and the lanterns stood completely still, their flames gently swaying in the night air. I had been hiking all morning, taking the trail up past Devil's Rock in the Columbia River Gorge. The sun was already low, spilling gold across the cliffside, and I found a flat spot to rest. I sat down, leaned back on my pack, and just looked out over the valley. The wind was calm, the kind that barely ruffled leaves, and everything felt quiet in a way that's hard to describe. A soft hush that made each sound sharper than it should have been. I noticed something odd. almost immediately. The shadows of the trees around me were stretching in strange directions, not following the sun the way they should. Some trees had shadows that seemed to defy natural light. I kept scanning the ridgeline, but there was nothing. My dog had wandered over to me by that point, sniffing the grass, unaware of what had happened. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting something to reappear from the woods, but the night was quiet, normal. When I went inside, I tried to convince myself I'd seen some kind of weird reflection. Maybe a distant streetlight bouncing off clouds, but it didn't make sense. The motion, the timing with the lanterns, the way it maintained the same distance as I moved, it didn't fit with anything I knew. That night, I went to bed with the image of the glow in my mind. Every so often, I'd wake to a creak in the house or the distant whistle of wind through the trees, and half expected to be outside, drifting along the ridge again. It never did. The next day, I checked the clearing, the fence, even the path along the ridge. Nothing had changed. No evidence, no scorch marks, no broken branches, no unusual tracks. Just ordinary grass, ordinary rocks, ordinary trees. I even checked with my neighbor, who'd been home all evening. He hadn't seen a thing. Weeks later, I'd sometimes swear I see a faint blur along the horizon when the night is still. Lanterns glowing softly in the yard. I tell myself it's imagination, that I'm remembering the first night too vividly, but part of me knows what I saw was real. Whatever it was, something deliberate, moving with intent, untouchable, keeping pace with me, as if it knew exactly where I'd be. I've gone back to work on the fence many nights since, always with the lanterns lit, and nothing else has appeared. Still, when the air is still and the horizon is empty, I can't stop thinking about that pale glow drifting along the ridge, holding its distance, observing, and the way the world itself seemed to pause for it. The cliff shadows seemed odd, almost purposeful. I wasn't sure what was making them look so strange. They weren't distorted by terrain or rocks. Something felt fundamentally wrong about how they stretched and bent. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks, but as I leaned forward on my elbows, scanning the cliff's edge, I noticed a soft, phosphorescent glow moving across the rocks below. It wasn't static like a reflection. This light had shape, around us, and moved with an eerie deliberateness. It would pause occasionally, then continue in a straight line before disappearing behind a jagged rock outcrop. No sound accompanied the movement. No wind rustled, no animals stirred. I tried standing to get a better view, but the glow had already vanished. Minutes passed as I waited, trying to rationalize it as sunlight hitting mineral patches. Yet it returned, tracing the exact same path, stopping at identical spots. This wasn't a flickering light, it was steady and soft. When I pulled out my phone to capture evidence, the moment I tapped the screen, the glow disappeared. The photo showed only ordinary rock, shadow, and some moss. Something else then caught my attention. The shadows from cliff edge to tree line seemed to be moving. The trees appeared to be subtly stretching, leaning toward the path of that mysterious light. I stepped back, suddenly feeling exposed. The silence was complete. No wind, no branch movement. Just that unsettling sensation of shadows shifting. I tried to convince myself it was exhaustion. I'd been hiking for hours, my neck sunburnt, legs stiff, but the movement wasn't imaginary. When I focused, I could see it clearly, synchronized with that faint, vanishing light. Going further along the trail seemed risky. Something wasn't right. My instinct screamed to stay put. A low boulder offered some cover as I crouched down, leaning over my pack. Silence hung heavy for a few minutes before the glow returned, barely visible, slipping along the cliff's edge and hovering briefly on a ledge. A faintly rounded silhouette flickered at the edge of my vision, too indistinct to identify. No features, no color beyond the ethereal light. Then it vanished as if someone had drawn a curtain across empty space. My chest tightened. I realized I'd stopped breathing. Talking out loud might ground me, it's just reflection, just light, probably quartz or something. Nothing's there." The words rang hollow. My eyes kept darting back to the cliff's edge, expecting the glow to reappear. Decision made. I'd pack up and head down before darkness consumed the landscape. Movement might restore some sense of normalcy. Convince my mind nothing strange was happening. The trail descended steeply, and tree shadows stretched unnaturally, looking somehow wrong. I passed the ledge where the glow had appeared, scanning constantly. Nothing moved. Rocks remained. Rocks. Trees stayed trees. Fog rolling from the gorge only elongated the shadows, making them sharper, more menacing. Twilight greeted me at the trailhead. A hint of embarrassment crept in. No lights followed. No strange apparitions. Passing cars looked perfectly ordinary. Still, I kept glancing back toward the cliffs, searching for some sign. Over dinner, I shared the story with my roommate. He laughed, suggesting sunstroke or an overactive imagination. I wanted to argue, but what evidence could I offer? No photographs, no footprints, just my memory. Even now, I feel that subtle shift in the shadows, the deliberate pauses of the glow. Its movement suggested awareness, as if it knew I was watching. In the days that followed, I returned to the trail. Early morning, late afternoon, just before sunset, nothing appeared. The cliffside looked perfectly normal. Shadows aligned naturally. Moss unchanged, yet something lingered. I had driven out to Miller Lake that evening, just to get away from everything. Work had been a nightmare, and the last thing I wanted was people. My dog, Toby, was curled up in the back seat, snoring, and the sky was that perfect mix of fading pink and gray, just before the sun sinks completely. I parked near the old wooden dock, the boards creaking under my boots as I stepped out. The air was cool, almost damp, and smelled like pine and wet earth. I sat down at the end of the dock, dangling my feet just above the water. Toby trotted ahead to sniff the shoreline, then laid down beside a cluster of reeds. I leaned back on my hands, letting the stillness of the lake wash over me. The surface of the water was nearly mirror smooth, reflecting the sky, the tree line, even me. Then something strange caught my eye. My reflection didn't move exactly the way I did. I shifted my head slightly and the reflection lagged, like it was caught in slow motion. When I lifted my arm, the hand in the water bent at a weird angle, almost as if it had its own joints. For a brief second, it wasn't even my hand. It looked thinner, paler, almost translucent. I froze, heart thudding, and blinked hard. When I opened my eyes again, my reflection had snapped back to normal. That's when I saw it. A tiny glowing shape hovering just above the far shore. At first, I thought it was a reflection of the sun, a trick of light on the water. But no, it was moving slowly, deliberately, gliding along the edge of the shoreline. I can't shake the image of that faint light, moving in a way that didn't obey gravity or wind, pausing as if it had intent, vanishing as if it knew I was looking. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I see it again. The soft glow creeping across the cliff, the impossibly bent shadows stretching out toward it, the silence that made my own breathing sound loud. Every time I hike that trail or even drive past Devil's Rock, I glance toward the cliffs, half expecting the glow to reappear and the shadows to twist once more. Though nothing ever does, I know my memory of it is as real as the ground under my feet. I can't explain it, and I've never seen anything like it since. I was standing by the lake, careful not to startle Toby. At first, a faint glow emerged, soft and pale like a gentle bulb. Nothing harsh or bright. It rose silently above the water, without causing even the slightest ripple or air movement. The light wasn't like any bird or insect I'd encountered. It didn't reflect light. It generated its own. My stomach knotted, and a cold sensation crawled up my spine. When I reached for my phone to capture the moment, the glow seemed to pause, as if aware of my attention. It drifted closer to the tree line. I squinted, trying to discern its shape, but it wasn't solid. Just a small, orb-like light moving with an ethereal, floating grace. As it passed over the water near the dock, the surface rippled subtly, responding to its presence despite an absence of wind. The ripples formed too precise a pattern, spreading in perfect concentric circles that felt unnatural. I whispered Toby's name. He looked up, ears alert, then back at the light. For a few heartbeats, it hovered above us. Then it began weaving toward the trees, adjusting its path mid-air with a smoothness that defied physical laws. Suddenly it vanished, not fading, not flickering, just gone, staring into the shadows. I half expected it to reappear, but only wind-swayed leaves remained. I tried rationalizing what I'd seen, maybe a distant lantern, but its movement was unlike anything familiar. Something else nagged at me. My reflection had behaved strangely, bending and moving independently. For those brief moments, everything felt slightly distorted. My hands, my face, even Toby seemed altered. The lake itself seemed to operate under a different logic. Eventually, I stood and pulled Toby up. My legs felt heavy, my mind spinning. One final scan revealed nothing extraordinary, just an ordinary mirror-like lake. Trees were just trees, water was just water. Walking back along the dock, each creak sounded thunderous in the silence. I got into the car, Toby jumping in behind me, shaking water from his fur. As we drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The lakeside treeline receded, its dark surface calm and unrevealing. I was out jogging just before sunrise on a foggy morning, where the world felt damp and muffled. Only my breathing and shoe thumps broke the silence as I ran along the trail outside my small town near Ashland, Oregon. The path wound through low hills and fields stretching toward the highway, where deer and foxes sometimes roam. But that morning was different. About 20 minutes into my run, the fog was so thick that streetlights created only dim yellow pools. Trees lining the trail were barely shadows, and the world looked gray and blurry. Suddenly, I noticed something unusual across the field, small lights moving slowly through the mist. Initially, I thought they might be distant vehicles, but these weren't like any cars I'd seen. 6 lights hovered precisely 4 or 5 feet above the ground, moving in a perfect, unbroken line. They were eerily level and uniform. When I stopped to catch my breath, more out of curiosity than fatigue, I realized something strange was happening. No sound emerged, no engine hum, nothing. Their movement was deliberate, almost mechanical in its precision. Weeks later, I still think about what I saw. The memory haunts me, especially during low-light moments when the landscape feels uncertain. My friend tried to convince me it was just a trick of dusk, maybe a reflection from a distant cabin window. But I know what I experienced. Something was out there that morning, something not of this world. Not an animal, not a vehicle, but something with its own awareness, just like the orb I'd seen at Miller Lake, where my reflection had bent and stretched as if the landscape itself had momentarily shifted. Sometimes, late at night, I catch a glimpse of that pale light floating just beyond the tree line before it vanishes again. I haven't returned to Miller Lake at dusk since that day. During daylight, it's just a normal lake with a dock, trees, and my dog Toby chasing sticks. But I know what I saw, and I can't shake the feeling that something else is watching, waiting just beyond our understanding. I was out for an early morning jog when something caught my eye. Lights flickered in the field, not like anything I'd seen from drones or toys. I moved closer, thinking it might be a maintenance crew or hunters, but the fog grew thicker as I approached and the lights vanished completely. My arms swept through the mist as I scanned the area, but found nothing. Just wet grass and faint tree shadows. I told myself it was probably some film crew setting up, or a photographer playing with fog effects. Then the lights reappeared, moving along the field in the same formation, seeming closer this time. No actual source was visible, no lanterns, no vehicles, just a strange glow. I tried running parallel on the trail, staying low, but each time I got within 50 yards, the lights would blink out instantly, as if someone had flipped a switch. Confused and uneasy, I slowed to a walk. For several minutes, they kept reappearing randomly, sometimes ahead, sometimes to the side, always in that perfect line. When I finished the trail loop and returned to my car, the fog was lifting. The fields and nearby highway looked undisturbed. No tracks, no footprints, no tire marks. I couldn't shake the memory of how precise and silent the movement had been. The pattern felt intentional, yet unrecognizable. Driving home, the fog patchy but still hanging over low areas, I passed the same field. For a brief moment, I thought I saw that faint glow moving through the mist. I blinked, and it vanished. I tried to dismiss it. About 5 miles later, stopped at a traffic light. I glanced in the rear-view mirror. My heart raced. The same soft white lights hovered in perfect formation behind me. Not red, not a reflection, a distant, ethereal glow, moving in perfect synchronization. I adjusted my mirror, shifted my seat, checked the back window. Nothing. When the light turned green, they disappeared completely, just gone. The morning fog had transformed the landscape, but the silence was what truly unnerved me. Those lights moved with such precision that nothing felt natural. They appeared briefly behind me, weaving through the mist, then vanishing when approached. A pattern so deliberate it defied explanation. I drove normally, checking mirrors constantly. Side mirrors, rear view, windows. I searched everywhere, but they had disappeared completely. By the time I reached home, the neighborhood looked entirely mundane, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Rationalization became my refuge. Local kids with flashlights, a strange optical effect from headlights and fog. Nothing explained their movement, their timing, their vanishing act. Later that afternoon, I shared the experience with a friend over coffee. He laughed, dismissing it as a trick of fog and light. I wanted to argue, but proof eluded me. Part of me doubted my own memory, yet I knew what I'd seen. The precision, the silence, something wasn't right. That evening, I drove the same route again, hoping to understand or recreate the moment. The fields were quiet, the fog gone, yet those images kept flickering in my mind. Lights moving in perfect formation, always just out of reach. Nights became restless. With the window slightly open, I'd drift towards sleep, seeing those lights weaving through imaginary mist. Always precise, always deliberate. In the days that followed, I walked the trail early mornings, searching for answers. Nothing unusual appeared. Normal fog, normal shadows, normal quiet. But I haven't forgotten how unnatural it felt. Those lights moving silently, appearing in my rearview mirror, then vanishing. Something about their movement suggested they weren't of any world I understood. Even now, months later, I still drive that road. Early mornings find me glancing repeatedly into the mirror, half expecting them to return. The night was silent, save for the squeaking of snow under my boots and my breath hanging like smoke in the air. I'd been working slowly, clearing the driveway, half thinking about dinner and half thinking about the coming work week. Our property was blanketed in white, after the storm had passed an hour earlier, leaving the streets slick and the fields eerily quiet. Then something caught my eye over the field beyond our yard. At first, I thought it might be a streetlight reflection or a plane, but there was no sound, no typical movement, just a pale shape hovering around 50 feet above the ground. My heart rate quickened. I'm not someone who imagines things easily, and I've lived here over 2 decades. I know every streetlight's flicker, every shadow the wind can cast across the snow. This was different. I put down my shovel and grabbed the binoculars from the porch. By the time I lifted them, the object seemed to have vanished. My pulse slowed, and I tried to convince myself I'd misjudged the angle or seen a street lamp's trick. But then, through the binoculars, a flicker of movement near the tree line caught my attention. Something shifted, just for a second, and then disappeared. I squinted, trying to adjust to the darkness. The snow reflected a faint glow from scattered town lamps, and the trees stood black and solid against the white field. I should have seen movement if anything was there, but I only caught that quick, almost imperceptible flash twice more. A low hum filled the air, not from a car engine or power lines, but a steady, quiet vibration that made the suspended snowflakes shimmer faintly. When I lowered the binoculars, the hum vanished. Raising them again revealed nothing. The field remained empty, the trees motionless. The fog comes and goes, the fields stay empty, and the lights don't return. But the memory of that movement haunts me, always right there at the edge of my vision, impossible to explain and completely unnerving. I was clearing snow from the driveway, scanning the tree line with a sense of unease. Something had caught my attention earlier, a movement that didn't quite make sense. The snow muffled sounds, but I could have sworn I heard a branch snap too, deliberate to be natural. Everything felt off. Stopping mid-work, I froze, straining to see and hear. The air seemed thicker, compressed by the snow. My phone was inside, but I didn't want to break my view. I tried convincing myself it might have been an owl or deer, but neither explanation fit the strange shape I'd glimpsed hovering earlier. One thing was certain, it wasn't a bird. When I raised the binoculars, whatever I'd seen had vanished. Things don't just disappear like that in real life. I continued clearing the driveway, but every few minutes, I'd catch a hint of movement in the field. A subtle ripple that made my skin crawl. Benny, my dog, wandered out from the garage and sat rigidly at the snow's edge. His ears were forward, tail low and tense. He didn't respond when I called, just stared intently at the field. After an hour in the cold with the wind picking up, I started doubting my own perceptions. Maybe my eyes were playing tricks, influenced by unusual snow reflections. I laughed nervously and motioned Benny inside. He came reluctantly, stopping periodically to growl softly toward the field. Once indoors, I set down the binoculars and poured some coffee. The kitchen felt normal, but I couldn't stop glancing out the window. The field remained still. Snow sparkled under the street lamp, and trees stood as black silhouettes against the night sky. My hands trembled slightly. I tried rationalizing what I'd seen, but that flash at the tree line nagged at me. The way it had hovered before vanishing kept replaying in my mind. I know snow and shadows. I've spent countless nights outside, walking the property, watching the skies. Nothing about this felt natural. Around midnight, I returned to the window with the binoculars, still searching for an explanation. The night was quiet and empty when I walked home from Jansen's Market, around 10:30. Small towns have a way of feeling abandoned, even with a few cars drifting down Main Street. I'd gone in for milk but found myself drifting through the store, barely noticing the shelves, my eyes mostly fixed on the cracked sidewalk. September's humidity hung thick in the air, the kind of sticky warmth that keeps cicadas singing long after darkness falls. Something caught my attention first, a subtle shift, barely perceptible. When I got home, the field was completely still. Untouched snow bore only my own tracks. No flash, no glow, no discernible shape anywhere. Benny curled up near the heater, his eyes half closed. But I kept scanning the darkness. The earlier hum in my ears had faded to a distant memory. Sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that hovering shape in the field vanish, the moment I looked directly at it. Faint flashes seemed to move at the edge of the trees, always just beyond clear view. Morning brought no answers. The field lay empty and pristine, snow crisp and wind settled. Life continued as if nothing had happened. While shoveling the driveway, I carefully checked the tree line. Nothing, not even the slightest disturbance. Benny sniffed around the yard's edge, but found nothing unusual. Later, I mentioned the weird glow to a neighbor, hoping they might have seen something. They laughed it off as reflections or late-night snow illusions. I wanted to argue, to explain what I'd seen, but I couldn't even articulate it to myself. All I had was a memory of hovering light, fleeting tree-edge flashes, and a strange vibration in the air. Weeks later, I still find myself thinking about that night whenever I'm outside. Sometimes I'll check the field after a snowstorm, just in case. I've replayed the entire scene in my mind countless times. What haunts me isn't the possibility that I imagined it all, but how it moved, how it vanished, and Benny's reaction. My dog isn't easily frightened, but whatever was out there grabbed his attention in a way I can't explain. I haven't truly seen it again, yet every time I clear snow from the driveway, I catch myself glancing at that field, half expecting a flicker or flash. And each time, I'm reminded that for just a moment, the world shifted in a way that made absolutely no sense. A strange rhythm caught my eye along Main Street, the headlights of passing cars blinking in perfect synchronization. At first, I thought someone might be playing with their high beams, or a car had suddenly braked. But something wasn't right. Every single headlight was flickering in exact unison. My heart started racing. This wasn't normal. Who would make every vehicle's lights move like that? I froze mid-stride, scanning the street. The lights continued their precise on-off pattern. Other people seemed oblivious, or maybe they were deliberately looking away. When I looked up, a sheet of pure white light covered the rooftops. No edges, no defined shape, just absolute brightness hovering above the storefronts. It was different from streetlights, more intense and featureless. For maybe 5 seconds, it hung there, making everything else look dim by comparison. I couldn't blink. My fingers tingled. The hair on my arms stood up as the car headlights seemed to dim, swallowed by this otherworldly glow. Then, suddenly, nothing. No sound, no movement. Just gone. The night returned to normal. Cars moved smoothly. Streetlights hummed their usual low buzz. But something had changed. That gnawing feeling in my chest told me something extraordinary had just happened. I tried rationalizing it, maybe a drone or a weird reflection from a new sign. But I'm not someone who believes without proof. And nothing mechanical behaves like that. Not drones, helicopters, or streetlights. Passing Miller's auto repair, I noticed the neon sign flickering in perfect sync with the earlier streetlights. My fingers hovered over my phone, unsure who I'd even call about something so strange. The neighborhood seemed eerily quiet as I walked home that night. Strange things started happening around me, lights flickering inside houses, turning on and off unpredictably. Lamps, TVs, maybe even refrigerators, were acting weird. Old Mr. Callahan caught my eye, sitting motionless at his table, mid-sip with a water glass. He blinked slowly and resumed his activity as if nothing unusual had occurred. My pace quickened. A strange static-like hum began filling my ears, not quite a tone or a drone, but more like the air itself was carrying a faint signal. When I tried to listen closely, it would fade in and out. Suddenly, I realized I was alone on the sidewalk. No people anywhere, though cars continued moving. Headlights were visible, but the streets felt bizarrely empty, an unsettling silence hanging in the air. As I reached my street, my front porch light flickered oddly, not like a normal bulb, but as if catching something invisible. Benny, my dog, burst out barking, his tail stiff and hackles raised. He circled the yard, growling low and staring at seemingly nothing. Stepping into the backyard, I searched for what was agitating him. Trees swayed in the wind, branches rustling, but everything else remained still. A dim white glow hovered above the lawn, similar to what I'd seen on Main Street, but softer, like filtering through mist. When I called Benny, the glow vanished slowly, almost as if it had been waiting to be noticed. I remained outside, flashlight trembling in my hand, scanning the sky and yard. Nothing returned. Street lights stayed steady, and the town settled into an unnatural, humid quietness. Inside, I tried making sense of it all. The hum, flickering lights, and brief hovering glow defied explanation. The car headlights, perfect synchronization. The way the glow just appeared and disappeared, none of it made sense. The next day, everything returned to normal. Streetlights worked, Cars ran their usual routes, and the unexplained events seemed to have vanished as mysteriously as they had appeared. It was an ordinary night in early October, the kind where the air feels heavy and the town settles into an unusual quiet after a long week. I was up on our house roof in Oakage, away from everyone else. My little brother slept inside. My parents watched TV downstairs. With a blanket and flashlight, I'd come up to sketch stars without interruption. That's when I saw it. Half a mile away, near the radio tower behind the old mill, something was moving in a way I'd never seen before. At first, I thought it might be a helicopter. We're used to things buzzing around the town's edges, but this was different. No lights, no sound, just a dark shape twisting around the tower like it was suspended on invisible strings. I squinted, trying to make sense of it. The movement wasn't like any aircraft. It turned at impossible angles, sharp 90-degree shifts that seemed to defy physics. Sometimes it would circle the tower, then shoot diagonally before looping back. When I aimed my flashlight toward it, nothing changed. The shape continued its strange dance, unaffected, as if existing in a slightly different reality. Then it rose, not exactly climbing, but shifting straight upward before vanishing into a patch of clouds. Just like that. Weeks have passed, but the memory remains vivid. My neighbor mows his lawn. Mr. Callahan, Benny sleeps in the sun. Nobody knows what I saw. Who would believe me? Every night now, I find myself scanning rooftops and treetops. When streetlights flicker just right, I feel that strange hum beneath my skin. I remember that bright, featureless light hovering silently above Main Street, before disappearing like it was never there. I haven't figured out what it was. Maybe I never will, but I know what I saw, and that's enough to change how a quiet town feels forever. The night had a strange rhythm, and I couldn't shake the feeling something was off. Up on the roof, sketching, everything changed in an instant. A dark shape flickered across the sky, here and gone before I could fully comprehend it. Not like a bird. Birds have predictable movements. This thing twisted and shot through the air, defying physics. My heart raced as I descended the ladder, and suddenly a low vibration caught my attention. Not quite a sound, more like an energy moving through the air. It vanished as quickly as it arrived, leaving me wondering if I'd imagined it. Back on the ground, bizarre events continued. The streetlights began flickering in perfect unison. 3 in a row, synchronized like some coordinated display. I blinked, and they returned to normal. My brain tried to rationalize, to find logical explanations. Inside, the strangeness persisted. Static crackled from nowhere. First a whisper beneath the house's background noise, then sharp and loud before fading. No radio was on, no source to be found. I tried to calm myself, to dismiss these experiences as fatigue or overactive imagination. Around 2 a.m., something woke me. Max, my dog, was growling softly, tension radiating from him. I pulled back the blinds, catching a fleeting glimpse of a dark shape. Or was it just a reflection? The yard remained empty, trees casting faint silhouettes against the night. The next day, everything seemed ordinary. The radio tower stood silent. Street lights functioned normally. No unexplained hums hung in the air. When I told my friends, they laughed, suggesting I'd been dreaming or spending too much time on the roof. Maybe they were right. But deep down, I knew what I'd experienced wasn't a dream. Some things can't be easily explained away. I was driving back from a job interview in Bishop, California. It was late, around 11:30 p.m., and Highway 168 twists through the eastern Sierra like it was carved into the side of the mountain. The road was empty, with yellow lines smearing past my headlights and trees dark and dense on either side. I like that stretch at night. There's almost no traffic. The air smells like pines, and the headlights catch the edges of cliffs in a way that feels cinematic. About 10 minutes into the winding descent, I noticed a row of lights hovering above the treetops on my right. They were perfectly aligned, like little Christmas bulbs stuck in a straight line and steady, not blinking. I first thought someone was working on a radio tower or maybe a logging operation, but nothing around there had power lines or equipment. The lights didn't have that warm orange glow of a street light either. They were cold, almost white. I slowed the truck to get a better look. When I blinked, honest, I literally blinked and looked back. The lights were suddenly miles ahead of me, still hovering just above the treetops. A week later, I went back onto the roof with binoculars and sat for a while. Nothing. Just the same old radio tower, the same quiet night sky. But I keep thinking about the way it moved. Something had been moving in impossible angles, circling a tower without any sound or lights, then vanishing into clouds. It wasn't just fast or agile. It seemed aware, like it knew I was watching, like it was testing the boundaries of the air and gravity. Every time I see a shadow twist too sharply or a streetlight flicker, I remember that shape, and though I try to rationalize, I can't. Something moved that night in ways nothing alive or mechanical should be able to, and whatever it was, it's out there. Even now, when I'm lying in bed and the wind rattles the window, I check the dark patches in the sky, half expecting it to come back, not hovering, not chasing, just circling, twisting, impossible angles, disappearing into clouds. The nights in Oakage feel different now. I still can't explain it, and part of me doesn't want to. I was driving along a mountain road when something caught my eye. Lights appeared on my right side, tracking the curves perfectly. They weren't drifting or floating, but moving exactly with my truck's path. I checked the rear view mirror, expecting a reflection, but saw nothing. These lights kept pace with every turn and incline, almost like they were connected to my vehicle. I sped up slightly, and they matched my speed precisely. The situation was unnerving. I'm not easily spooked, but their mechanical precision made me nervous. I flipped on the high beams to get a better look. No reflection, no outline, no shimmer, just a steady row of lights following the road's contours. I considered drones, but these weren't typical. They were too high, too long, too consistent. More importantly, there was no sound, no buzzing, no motor noise. The air was completely silent, except for my truck's engine. When I reached for my phone to record, it slipped from my hand. In that moment, when I looked back up, the lights vanished. Only darkness remained. Black trees, a starry sky. I slowed down, scanning the tree line, but found nothing. My heart raced. The mountain felt empty and exposed. I couldn't shake an unsettling feeling, so I kept driving, watching carefully for any sign of the lights. Around a blind curve, they reappeared, same alignment, hovering above the treetops, without flashing or seeming propelled, just gliding smoothly over the pine tops, with no visible craft or outline. I pulled into a turnout to think. Maybe they were cars on a hidden road, but that made no sense. The terrain was too rugged, the height too consistent. I watched for minutes. The lights remained unchanged. No blinking, no sound, almost eerily aware of my presence. I drove down the mountain, my eyes constantly scanning the tree line. The lights had been tracking me, moving in an impossible formation, silent and precise. Even after they vanished, their presence lingered. I couldn't shake the feeling of being studied, not threatened, but observed with an eerie detachment. Back home, I spent hours checking maps and satellite views, searching for any explanation. Nothing made sense. Dense, uneven forest with jagged treetops offered no logical path for something to move so smoothly alongside my truck. When I retraced the route in daylight, the landscape revealed no clues. I've shared the story with a few people, but their reactions range from polite nods to dismissive laughter. Some suggest drones or distant lights, but those explanations feel inadequate. What I saw was different. Too high, too quiet, too controlled. It wasn't something I could chase or understand. One moment the lights were everywhere, perfectly aligned, and the next, gone. Now, every time I drive that highway, I find myself watching the treetops, searching the black folds for those cold white lights. They weren't terrifying in a screaming sense. but something more unsettling. A quiet wrongness that shakes your perception of reality. For weeks afterward, every straight line of lights, every reflection made me look twice. Were they watching again, gliding silently above the trees, keeping pace like that night? I couldn't dismiss the memory, no matter how impossible it seemed. The experience changed how I see ordinary things. Something was out there, following in silence, measuring or observing, not to threaten, but simply to see who passes by. And though I never saw the lights again, the possibility remains, hovering just beyond understanding. Noah was still studying his spelling list under the phone's glow, well past his bedtime. Emma, our 7-year-old, had fallen asleep, her head resting against the back of her seat. Before we could fully park, the porch light began its strange flickering. The rhythm was precise, like someone rapidly toggling a switch. For a moment, I assumed it was just an old bulb or faulty wiring. This house had seen more years than any of us. Claire frowned and stepped out to open the umbrella. Weird shadows danced across the house's facade, interrupted by the erratic light. "Dad, look," Noah said, suddenly alert. His phone lay forgotten on the seat, his face pale from the cold drip running down his hoodie. Following his gaze, I scanned the sky beyond the neighbor's maple tree. Something was moving deliberately across the cloud band. Initially, I thought it might be a routine search plane or aircraft light. But this was different. An oval shape, soft-edged and white, like a paper cutout suspended against the clouds. Eerily silent, it glided without a sound. Rain pelted the windshield, gravel settled under our tires, yet this object made no noise. No engine, no rotor, nothing to explain its presence over our block. The porch light flickered again, seemingly synchronized with the oval's slow movement. Emma stirred, then sat up and whispered, "Is it a balloon?" The kind of question children ask when they're seeking a safe, explainable answer. I stepped out of the car, keys in hand, noticing the air had grown unexpectedly colder. Across the street, a neighbor's door opened briefly. A head peeked out, then quickly withdrew. Mrs. Delaney's fence-side porch light glowed its usual orange, distinctly different from our flickering beacon. As the oval passed overhead, it seemed to dim everything beneath it, with an unnatural negative light, as if the stars themselves were being muted. Claire pulled me closer, her voice trying to sound calm but failing. I hated how my heartbeat felt like it belonged to someone else. The part of me that wanted to act sensibly said to document what was happening. The father in me wanted to appear unafraid for the kids. Noah had already started filming on his phone. I cracked a dumb joke, get his good side, and he laughed once, mechanically, then went silent as he tilted the screen upward. Later, when we watched the video together, it showed only gravel, wet leaves, and the edge of our roof. The white oval skimmed past the treetops, appearing as a bright, wrong smear with no sound except distant rain and tires. Something strange was happening. The phone battery, full at 80% just moments ago, now showed 38% and blinked low, as if something had drained it. The street, usually humming with highway noise 2 miles away, was completely silent. No distant trucks, no insect sounds. The old maple tree stood motionless, not even a whisper of wind. Our world had shrunk to this small yard and an unaccountable light moving on its own schedule. It was large enough to blot out the higher stars. As it moved, tiny lights appeared in the sky, more like pinpricks than stars. They hung in a loose curve around the oval, almost like an audience. These lights didn't move independently, but mirrored the oval's path, maintaining a steady distance. I unclenched my hands from the keys and walked to the lawn's edge, my feet leaving wet prints in the grass. The porch lights flickered and then went out completely, but only our porch. The rest of the block remained normally lit. For a moment, the white oval was our only light, omnipresent and impossible to look at directly. Then, as quickly as it began, it seemed to end. A quick wave, and the light dimmed to a glow before lifting away, leaving us in stunned silence. The evening started ordinary enough until the oval appeared, silent and smooth. It rose past the roof and treetops, then vanished without a trace. No sound, no aftermath, just empty sky, where something had been moments before. Neighborhood sounds quickly returned, filling the space it left. Mrs. Avest, it left. Delaney's radio played softly. A dog barked down the street. The highway hummed, indifferent. Our porch light flickered back to its steady yellow glow, almost like an apology. We moved mechanically. Claire locked the door. Emma simply stated, "It went away." Noah kept his phone pointed at the ceiling, waiting. I checked the breaker box, following that universal advice about not jumping to conclusions. Everything read normal. The smoke detector blinked its routine rhythm. The refrigerator droned like a dull engine. We tried fitting the experience into familiar categories. An air show? No planned events. Military flares? Too quiet. Drones? They'd make noise at that proximity. Balloons? The physics didn't align. The kids imagined stories. A guardian star. A cloud with a face. Claire made tea, moving deliberately, cataloging ordinary objects as if to reassure herself of normalcy. Later, after the children slept and the house settled, I stood by the living room window, my tea gone lukewarm. The sky looked identical, same clouds, same stars, yet something fundamental had shifted in my perception. The oval hadn't been dramatic. No swooping, no chasing. It moved with an almost calculated slowness, then disappeared without a whisper. Small, inexplicable details lingered. Battery drain, light strobing, an unusual street silence that defied explanation. Who would I even call about such an encounter? Before bed, I reviewed the footage. A white shape crossing the pixelated night, rain tapping the roof. The clip captured exactly what we'd witnessed. A quiet, deliberate transit and vanishing without any supernatural markers. Something white and slow and completely silent had briefly held the sky that night, quietly interrupting normal. We were home. We were all there. Life simply carried on with a small, unexplained gap. Sometimes the memory returns in pieces. A pause in the wind, a light that seems too steady for the sky. I catch myself glancing up when loading the car or walking the dog, more by habit than belief. The street remains ordinary most of the time. Kids ride bikes. Someone puts out trash. Small roof repairs happen. But for those few minutes, something inexplicable occurred, and then vanished. Just a thing that hadn't been supposed to be there, and then wasn't. We slept because kids sleep, bills need paying, and tomorrow stubbornly remains a workday. In the morning, the yard looked normal. Wet grass, a few fallen leaves, the porch light behaving like a beautiful bulb. The only evidence was our shared memory and the video file on Noah's phone, which everyone studied a bit too intently that day, passing screens around like a hushed secret. We'd been planning the camping trip for months. A weekend in tents, with 3 friends, deep in the thick forest of Pine Hollow, northern Vermont. Mia, Josh, Caleb. And I wanted nothing more than woods and stars, no phones, just pure wilderness. Just past dusk, we set up camp near the forest's edge. The forest was so dense, it swallowed sunlight before it could touch the horizon. Our first evening passed uneventfully. We cooked hot dogs, shared ridiculous stories, and tried to ignore the surrounding silence. I was the first to notice something strange. While stretching my legs and collecting water from a creek, I wandered slightly off the trail. The forest had settled into its deep night stillness, wind rustling branches, occasional twig snaps. Then I saw it, a dim red light, flickering faintly, weaving between trees, about 50 yards away. The light moved with an odd rhythm, almost gliding, darting left and right, as if searching. Initially, I assumed it was another camper's flashlight, though we weren't supposed to have company this far into the wilderness. "Hey, you guys see that red light?" I called back. Mia and Josh joined me at the clearing's edge. Caleb remained near the tents, adjusting a lantern. Probably another camper, Mia suggested casually. We followed the moving light carefully through the trees, keeping our voices low. The forest floor was damp with fallen leaves. Pine scent heavy in the air. Every step felt loud. The light didn't behave normally. It moved along the tree line in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, like it knew we were tracking it. Maybe it's one of those little laser pointers, Josh suggested, his voice tight with tension. We pressed forward, my eyes locked on the red glow, trying to understand its origin. Just as the trees thinned out, the light suddenly lifted. First, slowly, then rapidly, straight up into the night sky. No sound, no movement, no explanation. It vanished completely, leaving only darkness and the smell of wet leaves. We froze, Mia whispered. What? What was that? I could only Nothing I've ever seen. Back at camp, Caleb wanted details. We tried explaining, but our words felt empty. We kept glancing at the trees, half expecting the light to reappear. It didn't. That night was restless. Every branch creak, every twig snap made me sit upright. Rustling leaves sounded like something was watching, something the red light might have left behind. The others felt it too. We whispered to each other, unsure if we were seeking comfort or trying to convince ourselves it was just nerves. Morning brought normalcy. Birds sang. The creek flowed. Sunlight filtered through the trees. We hiked around, searching for any sign of what we'd experienced. No footprints, no gear, no marks in the damp soil. During the drive home, I kept checking the rearview mirror, watching for a red flicker. Josh kept muttering about tricks of the light. Mia remained silent. Caleb stared out the window, hands clenched, processing something unspoken. Sometimes, when we're hanging out, we talk about that night. None of us can make sense of it. The way it moved, the patterns, how it vanished without a trace. On his knees, something just wasn't right. It wasn't normal. It wasn't human. It didn't belong in the forest, at least not in any way we've ever seen. I haven't seen anything like it again. Not in the woods near my town, not on hikes in other states, nowhere. Yet when I think about it, there's this lingering sense that whatever it was didn't leave entirely. Part of me remembers the way that red light moved, like it had a mind of its own. I'd rather not know if it's still there, waiting between the trees. Deep in your chest, there's that faint feeling like you're being watched, but you don't know from where or why. It was a small thing, a little red light, but it changed how I feel about the woods. Quiet nights aren't quiet anymore. Shadows aren't just shadows. And when the wind rustles through pine needles, I catch myself holding my breath, hoping it's nothing, hoping it's just the wind. I woke up to the sound of Rusty whining. At first, I thought it was just a dream. The bedroom clock glowed 203 in red digits. It was around 2 a.m., but the whining didn't stop. Then came the scratching at the door, sharp, urgent, like he was trying to get me to move. My little golden retriever never does this. He's usually content, sleeping at my feet. I rubbed my eyes, sat up, and listened. I slid out of bed, pulling on a sweatshirt, my bare feet touching the cold hardwood. The house was silent, apart from Rusty, whose whining had risen to a soft bark. I called his name. "What is it?" The sound didn't answer me, but it kept him at the door. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and opened the back door. The air hit me immediately, humid, damp, still. I live in a small house on the outskirts of Salem, Massachusetts, and the backyard backs up to some wooded lots that stretch for a mile or more. Normally, nights like this are dark, almost pitch black once you pass the porch light. But the backyard wasn't dark. It was lit in this pale, almost white glow. Not bright like a floodlight, not warm like a lamp, just pale, diffuse light that covered the yard in a soft haze. The backyard was silent and dark when I first noticed the glow. No obvious source was visible, no lamp, no moonlight reflecting strangely. The light just hung there, casting shadows across the trees, the fence, even Rusty standing beside me. My hands gripped the flashlight tightly, and I felt completely still. Rusty's single bark broke the silence. Then he sat watching the yard intently. The air carried an unusual scent, sharp and metallic, not quite unpleasant. Barefoot on the cold, wet grass, I called out hesitantly, not expecting a response. The glow remained motionless, as if waiting. My dog's body language told me something was different. His ears were raised, his posture tense, tail rigid. I swept the flashlight across the yard, seeing only dew glistening on the grass. When I spoke Rusty's name, the glow began to fade, almost as if it recognized my voice. Frozen in the half-light, my breath visible in the cold, I watched it dissolve into darkness. Seconds later, the backyard returned to normal. Trees black. Fence a shadowy line. Rusty still alert and sniffing the air. I stood there a long time, hoping it would return. Explanations raced through my mind. Streetlight reflection, moonlight on fog. But something felt different. The air seemed thicker, vibrating with an energy I could feel deep in my chest. Rusty, typically unbothered by shadows, was clearly sensing something significant. Eventually, I went inside, leaving the back door slightly open. Rusty remained at the threshold, watching. I brewed coffee and sat listening. Every neighborhood sound seemed heightened. Leaves rustling, distant dog barks, but nothing more happened. By morning, I almost convinced myself it had been imagination. Sunlight sparkled on the dew. The backyard looked completely ordinary. Rusty snored softly on the living room rug, yet that strange vibration lingered in my chest, a reminder that something inexplicable had occurred. I later checked with neighbors, seeking confirmation or explanation. Nothing. Rusty and I were standing in the yard that night, and something had been there, something that wasn't supposed to exist. I haven't seen it since, despite my attempts to understand what happened. I've spent late nights scanning the yard, keeping the porch light on, even calling Rusty's name into the darkness. Nothing ever reveals itself, but in those moments of heavy, still air, I feel that familiar tension, a low hum in my chest, suggesting the glow could return at any moment. When I mentioned this to a hiking friend who knows night photography, she explained how atmospheric conditions can create strange light effects, making fog glow or dew shimmer. But this was different. No surfaces were reflecting light. It simply existed and then vanished. Rusty seems unaffected now. He doesn't show fear anymore, though I've caught him staring into the backyard long after we've gone inside. Sometimes before bed, I'll check the yard, but I don't linger outside. I just remember the pale glow, that distinct smell in the air, and the unsettling sense that something had been watching us before silently departing. It happened during an early September morning, on the East Ridge Trail in the Rockies, about 10 miles from the nearest road. A thin fog hugged the lower mountain slopes, and I'd started late, hoping to catch the sunrise at the summit. I knew this trail well, but that day felt different. Unusually quiet, with barely a bird's song breaking the silence. My gear was standard, a pack with water and snacks, and I was moving slowly up the steep, sometimes loose trail. My legs were still stiff from the previous day's drive, around 20 minutes past a bend near a scree slope. I saw it, a silver flash hovering or drifting just above the ridge, to my right. Initially, I thought it might be a reflection from my headlamp, or a trick of the morning fog, but its movement was deliberate, sliding along the ridge's contour without sound, without wind, without any explanation. It was simply there, gliding. The low sun cast a pale orange light, making the reflection brilliantly visible against the gray rocks. Shaking, I reached into my pack for binoculars, desperate to understand what I was seeing. The ridge was silent, except for a strange, intermittent static that seemed to echo between the rocks. I was hiking, my body cold and sweaty, when I first spotted the silver shape drifting horizontally along the ridge's edge. It was smooth and featureless, possibly the size of a small car or larger, but without anything nearby to judge its scale, I couldn't be certain. Its movement was too deliberate and high to be a kite, and unlike drones, no buzzing sound accompanied its presence. I continued pushing up the trail, stepping over roots and loose rocks, keeping my eyes fixed on this mysterious object. But when I reached a vantage point where I should have had a clear view, it vanished. No flash, no glint, just the ridge, low settling fog, and rocks faintly shining in the morning light. The silence was unnerving. Even the wind that typically sweeps across this ridge was muted. Then came the crackling, a high-pitched hiss that seemed to emanate from everywhere simultaneously. It flared briefly, then faded like a radio being tuned without finding a station. I froze, leaning on my hiking poles, scanning the valley below. The static grew slightly louder, then receded again. My stomach tightened. I wanted to call out, but my voice felt small against the mountainous landscape. I stepped back from the trail's edge, lowering my binoculars. The static persisted, low and intermittent, almost rhythmic between the rocks. Moving down the slope didn't change its volume or location. Attempting to document the experience, I pulled out my phone. No bars, no GPS. Just the typical no-service icon of high mountain terrain. My microphone barely captured the sound, just a faint, whisper-like hiss. I debated descending immediately, but curiosity anchored me. I needed to understand, to see it again. Driven by this impulse, I climbed another few hundred feet to a small outcrop overlooking the opposite valley, hoping for answers. I hiked that trail dozens of times since, never seen anything like it again. But sometimes, when the wind is quiet and the fog is low, I swear I can hear that faint static in my head. And I remember the ridge, the silver shape, and the feeling of being watched by something I couldn't identify. I stepped out onto the porch around 11:30 p.m., just to get some air. It had been one of those sticky August nights where the house feels like it's holding heat from the day, and even with the ceiling fans on, nothing really cools down. I leaned on the railing, listening. Nothing visible was around on the ridge. No silver, no reflection, just fog settling in pockets between trees and boulders. A faint, sporadic static persisted, as if the mountain itself was whispering in an unknown language. I stayed there breathing and listening, trying to convince myself it was a natural phenomenon. Maybe it was atmospheric interference, or a strange echo from a distant radio signal, but rational explanations didn't ease the tightness in my chest or the awareness that I wasn't alone. Eventually, I started back down. My legs were sore, my mind racing. The fog began to lift as the sun climbed higher, revealing the valley, the trail, and familiar scree slopes. The static had faded entirely by the time I reached the forested section, replaced by normal morning sounds. Birds chirped, a waterfall echoed in the distance, and leaves rustled. I checked the ridge one last time before turning toward the trailhead. Everything looked normal. No silver object, no flicker of light, no sign that anything unusual had passed through. I kept my binoculars around my neck, half expecting to see it again, but there was nothing. Back at my truck, I stared at the horizon for a long time, thinking about what I'd seen, or maybe thought I'd seen. I called my friend Mark, who hikes the area often, asking if he'd noticed anything unusual in that section of the trail recently. He laughed, said he hadn't, and suggested I was seeing reflections or losing it from fatigue. But I wasn't tired. I was alert. Everything about it felt deliberate. The slow drift of the silver object, the absolute silence, the crackling static that came right after it vanished. I drove home slowly, keeping my eyes on the mountains, scanning the ridges and valleys. I was sitting on my porch, enjoying the quiet of the country evening. Hank, my lab, was dozing on the steps when something caught both our attention. A beam of light, sharp, steady, and completely unlike anything I'd seen before, was sweeping across the tree line at the far end of my yard. I live near Fairview, Ohio, in a small place with a big backyard and woods bordering the property. The gravel road was silent, and I had just finished mowing the lawn earlier that day, settling in with a beer when this strange light appeared. This wasn't like a flashlight from a neighbor or a car reflection. It moved with an unnatural precision, cutting through the darkness methodically from left to right. The sky was clear, stars visible, with a few distant clouds drifting eastward. I strained to see what might be causing it. No helicopter, no plane, no metallic glint explained the phenomenon. Curious, I grabbed my flashlight and aimed it toward the beam. Nothing happened. The light continued its steady sweep, completely unaffected by my attempt to interfere. It was as if my light didn't even exist. Hank's ears perked up, and he followed me as I stepped off the porch onto the gravel, growling softly. When I called out, "Hey, who's there?" my voice seemed small and insignificant in the vast night. No response came, not even a leaf rustling. The beam paused momentarily, almost like it acknowledged my movement, then resumed its methodical scanning. I wondered if it might be a drone, but scanning the sky revealed nothing. No lights, no sound, no explanation. The wind was barely a whisper. Something strange was happening in my backyard that night, and neither Hank nor I could explain it. Hank was restless that night, his ears forward, watching something I couldn't quite pin down. The yard was eerily silent. No truck rumbling on the gravel road, no distant train horn, just a strange, thin beam of light sweeping methodically across the tree line. I whistled, hoping for some reaction. Hank barked once, low and tense. The beam continued its steady movement, casting sharp shadows of treetops on the floor through my open blinds. Something felt off. Grabbing my binoculars, I scanned the area. No drone, no vehicle, no discernible source. Just this light that seemed to materialize from nowhere. My hands grew clammy, stomach tight with unease. Time warped strangely. Each minute stretched like an eternity. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the beam rotated upward, rising above the trees. After a few suspended seconds, it vanished completely. No trace remained. Hank growled softly, then settled back to sleep. Morning brought normalcy. Dew-covered grass, chirping birds, the occasional car passing. Days later, I mentioned the incident to Greg, my neighbor who raises goats up the road. He barely reacted, suggesting maybe it was something mundane. But I knew what I'd seen was anything but ordinary. The yard that night held a mystery I couldn't explain. A beam of light with no origin, no sound, no explanation. Just silence and an inexplicable presence that vanished without a whisper. I was driving back from my sister's place late one Sunday night. Her home is about an hour away in a small town outside Springfield. Dinner and conversation on her porch had kept me longer than planned, and by the time I hit the road, darkness had already fallen. The night was clear, with stars overhead and a long black highway stretching ahead. The route is mostly rural, 2-lane roads cutting through cornfields, with occasional tree clusters. I usually don't mind the drive, but that night, exhaustion was creeping in. The kind of tired where you keep promising yourself just 20 more minutes. I glanced at the dashboard clock after passing my usual landmark, a big red barn. 10:13. I was doing mental math, calculating I'd be home by 10:40 if no deer or tractors interrupted the journey. And suddenly, the clock read 10:47. I blinked several times, thinking maybe the display was glitching, but the numbers remained steady and bright. My headlights illuminated a highway section I didn't recognize. My stomach lurched. I was miles further than expected, as if I'd skipped an entire segment of the drive. No memory of stopping, no recollection of drifting off. Not even feeling groggy, just abruptly aware that half an hour had vanished. I slowed down, pulling onto the shoulder and switching on hazard lights. My hands trembled on the steering wheel. Repeatedly checking mirrors, I felt exposed with dark fields stretching on both sides. Retracing my mental path, I remembered passing the barn at 10:13 and a road curve, maybe 5 minutes later. Then nothing until that glowing 10:47. Nights afterward, I'd find myself driving past that tree line, occasionally catching my gaze fixed on the wood's edge, waiting for something. The beam hasn't returned since that night, but the memory persists. How deliberate it felt, moving across trees as if searching. What haunts me most is that I never saw its source. No plane, no drone, no helicopter. Just a perfect, silent spotlight cutting through the darkness. No explanation from the hunting club or distant farm could account for what I'd experienced. The person I spoke with hadn't seen or heard anything that night, but the memory of that unexplained light remains vivid, a silent mystery etched in my mind. I came home late that night, the drive still gnawing at me. Something felt off from the moment I returned to the highway after whatever happened in that stretch of darkness. No radio, no headlights, nothing, just an unsettling blank space. My mind kept replaying those missing minutes. 10:13 to 10:47, like someone had carelessly cut and spliced time itself. I'd driven the route countless times, but this time I was somehow 15 miles further down the road than expected. Everything looked normal, yet nothing felt right. The sky seemed different, stars slightly misaligned. I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see something, headlights, a shadow, anything unusual tracking me. When I finally pulled into my driveway just past 11, I sat with the engine running, watching the clock. Each minute ticked by normally, almost mockingly. Inside, I checked my phone. No calls, no texts during that lost time. Even stranger, my gas gauge had dropped more than it typically would for that drive, just enough to make me notice. Sleep came in fitful bursts that night. Before dawn, a sound woke me, not the usual creaks of an old house or wind against the roof, but a constant, low metallic hum that seemed to vibrate through walls and windows. Around 4:30 on a foggy October morning, I sat up and listened. Through my bedroom window, I could see the barn's dim outline. Fog rolled across the pasture, thick enough to obscure the fence line. This wasn't a typical morning. No wind in the pines, no distant cow calls. This hum felt different, reaching deep into my chest. I pulled on my boots and robe, stepping outside. The cold hit my face immediately, fog clinging to my eyelashes. My truck sat near the barn, silent and dark. As I squinted across the pasture, I noticed something unusual about the cattle. They weren't scattered as they normally would be, grazing or resting. Something was wrong. The cattle weren't like their usual lazy selves in the early morning. Instead, they were pressed tight against the far fence, all facing the same direction with their heads down and eyes fixed on something I couldn't yet see. A strange hum made the hairs on my neck stand up. I walked slowly through the wet grass, my boots sinking slightly. The fog blurred everything, like looking through frosted glass. Suddenly, a faint glow appeared, hovering about 20 feet above the ground in the pasture's center. It wasn't bright enough to light the entire field, but it cast a pale gold shine on the cattle's edges. My heart raced. For a moment, I thought it might be a fog-induced illusion, or a reflection from the barn, but the glow's shape was too consistent, round like a lantern, yet without any wire or flame I could explain. As I took careful steps closer, the hum remained constant, pressing against me through my boots and the metal fence I gripped for balance. The cattle were completely motionless, staring silently. I pulled out my flashlight and clicked it on, cutting through the misty air. That's when something strange happened. The glow flickered once, almost like a blink, and then vanished completely. No movement, no sound, no trace left in the thick mist. I stood frozen, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. The fog hung heavy, the cattle remained pressed against the fence, and the hum had softened slightly, as if acknowledging the glow's disappearance. I swept my flashlight across the field, finding nothing, no object, no reflection, no smoke. For a long time I gripped the fence, attempting to rationalize it as an electrical issue. But there was no transformer near the pasture, and the cattle's behavior was too unusual. They were rigid, silent, unnaturally fixed in place. Finally, I backed toward the house, carefully stepping through the thick fog to avoid tripping. Reaching the porch, I glanced back one last time. The pasture looked completely normal again, as if nothing had ever happened. The cattle scattered slowly across the field, some lying down while others drifted toward the barn as if nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. The pale glow had vanished, and with it, the strange hum that had filled the air moments before. Early morning silence settled over the landscape, with fog hanging low across the grass. I remained on the porch, coffee in hand, trying to make sense of what I'd just witnessed. My mind raced, searching for rational explanations. Maybe it was a plane's reflection or a distant hunter's lantern, but nothing seemed to fit. The timing, the cattle's unnatural stillness, the unexplained hum, none of it made sense. By sunrise, the field looked completely normal. Cattle grazed lazily, and the barn cast long shadows over the pasture. Everything appeared exactly as it should be, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been there, hovering silently just above the ground, watching, and then disappearing without a trace. I went inside to check my phone, hoping for some explanation. No messages, no alerts, nothing to suggest I'd missed something obvious. All that remained was the memory of that mysterious hum and the pale glow that had hung over my pasture, and the image of the herd pressed against the fence in an unnaturally perfect formation. Later that morning, I drove into town. I told myself I'd laugh it off if anyone asked, but no one did. Even now, whenever I look out over that field, I can't help wondering about what was hovering there just above the grass, and why the cows were all facing it. The entire incident lingered in my mind, like the morning fog, unexplained and unsettling. I woke up with a start, cold enough that I could see my breath. The fire had long since died, just a few faint embers glowing dimly. After a quick trip to the edge of the trees, I returned to the tent, thinking nothing of the typical chilly forest night. An hour later, something jolted me awake, that uneasy feeling when sleep suddenly abandons you. I lay motionless, staring at the nylon ceiling, listening. The woods felt different, not exactly silent, but muted. No wind rustled the trees, no insects chirped, no distant loons called, just a heavy stillness pressing in from all sides. Then I heard it, a whisper right outside the tent. My name, Eli, spoken in Aaron's voice, quiet, as if he were crouched just outside the flap. I propped myself up on one elbow, heart racing. Aaron? Silence. Seconds dragged by, the tent air feeling tight and stale. Again, the whisper came. Eli. Softer this time. I sat fully upright, pulse hammering in my ears. Aaron's tent was 20 feet away, across the fire ring. No reason for him to be at my tent in the middle of the night. Swallowing hard, I reached for the zipper and slowly pulled it down. The sound seemed thunderous in the absolute quiet. Pushing the flap open, I peered out. Empty. The clearing looked washed out, pale. At first I thought it was moonlight, but then I saw it hovering just above the treetops. A glowing orb, about the size of a compact car. Drifting silently, the light wasn't blinding, soft and milky, spreading evenly across the clearing. My tent, the fire ring, even the pine trunks glowed faintly. Shadows stretched in unnatural, sharp directions. I remained frozen, head stuck outside the tent, staring. The orb moved deliberately, gliding horizontally across the tree line. No sound, no flickering, no change in brightness. For a moment I considered it might be the moon behind a cloud, but the shape was too defined, too close. This wasn't above us. It was sliding just above the trees. Quickly, I ducked back inside, zipped the flap, and sat in the dark, trying to breathe quietly. My heart pounded so hard I feared it might wake the others. Then another realization hit me about the whisper. Here's the rewritten text. Something had whispered my name right outside the tent that night. It wasn't from across the clearing, but from just inches away from where I'd been sleeping. My throat was tight, choking back any potential scream. Minutes stretched like hours as I sat frozen, staring at the tent wall's faint, pale glow. I wanted to wake Aaron or Matt, but the words wouldn't come. The light slowly dimmed, and I cautiously cracked open the tent flap. The orb drifted silently upward, rising above the treetops until it vanished into the night sky. By dawn, everything looked normal again. Birds chirped in the branches, and Aaron slept peacefully. What I later nobody else heard or saw anything. I never mentioned it again. But the memory of that moment, the silent clearing bathed in pale light, stayed with me. Late October's chill gripped the morning. Breath visible in the air, I drove to the river earlier than usual. My truck's headlights cut weakly through thick fog, barely illuminating the road ahead. Around 5:15 a.m., just before sunrise, I parked at the gravel pull-off. The trail to my fishing spot winds a quarter-mile through dense willows hugging the riverbank. Familiar ground meant no need for a flashlight. Fog muffled every sound. My boots, crunch, the river's rush. Walking felt like moving through a silent, enclosed space. At the bank, I set down my tackle box on a flat rock. The sky remained dark, with only a hint of gray promising sunrise behind the clouds. By touch, I rigged my fishing line and cast out, hearing the soft plop as it hit the water. I was out fishing early that morning, the fog thick as cotton and hanging over everything. Silence blanketed the river and surrounding fields. No trucks rumbling in the distance, no train horns breaking the stillness. Just absolute quiet. Then I saw the lights. At first, just a single bright point cutting through the mist, but soon another appeared beside it, and then a third below, forming a perfect triangle. They weren't like normal aircraft lights. They didn't blink or move. They just hung there motionless and pale white, suspended above the river. I gripped my fishing rod, staring upward. My mind tried to make sense of what I was seeing. Maybe distant towers. But I knew this spot well. No towers were out here. And towers don't just materialize and vanish in fog like these lights were doing. A strange feeling washed over me. Not fear, exactly, but a deep sense that something wasn't right. Something my brain couldn't categorize or understand. Almost unconsciously, I set my rod down and reached for my flashlight. When I clicked it on and aimed the beam through the fog, something extraordinary happened. The instant the light touched those suspended points, they disappeared, not faded, not drifted away, just gone. One moment solid and steady, the next, nothing but mist. My hand trembled as I kept the light pointed upward. The fog swallowed the beam quickly, like shining into a wall of cotton. After a few minutes, I switched off the light and listened. The river continued its rhythmic gurgling against the rocks, as if nothing unusual had occurred. But something had changed. The silence felt heavier, more oppressive. I packed my gear hastily, not caring about tangling lines or careful stowing. Every instinct screamed at me to leave. The walk back to my truck felt endless. Each step echoed too loudly against the mist. I kept glancing behind me, knowing I could barely see a few yards, but feeling watched. My gut insisted I wasn't alone out there. When I finally reached the gravel lot, the fog had thinned just enough to make out my truck's shape. I threw my gear inside and drove away. That strange encounter replaying in my mind. I was out running early that summer morning, padding along my usual route around Lake Mendota. The morning was warm already, with a thin fog rolling low across the ground. I'd started jogging in the mornings because Wisconsin afternoons were too hot and muggy, and at 5:15 a.m., the world felt quiet and still. I'd forgotten my earbuds that day, so the silence was sharp, just the sound of my shoes on pavement and distant insects waking up. Paper flags from the 4th of July were still stuck in front yards I passed. By the time I reached the trail circling the lake, the fog had grown thicker. The water was glassy, reflecting the pale gray sky. That's when I saw them. At first, they looked like fading stars, but they were too low. 7 faint lights hovered over the water, not bright, just visible against the haze. They weren't blinking like plane lights, but steady and barely moving, as if tethered above the lake. I slowed to a walk, wiping sweat from my forehead and squinting. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe drones, someone flying early. But there was no sound. The water usually carried noise easily, yet everything was dead, quiet. Then the lights shifted. One by one, they slid into a perfect straight line over the lake. No wobble, no uneven spacing. Just a clean row glowing softly in the morning mist. My chest tightened as I counted them again. 7 lights. Something felt wrong. Later, driving home, I couldn't shake the memory. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, headlights cutting through the fog. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see 3 pale lights hanging above my truck, following me down the road. The morning silence was eerie. No gulls or geese broke the stillness over the lake, their usual dawn chorus completely absent. My footsteps echoed along the shoreline trail, each step feeling heavier as I glanced nervously around. The trees stood motionless, not even a rustle of branches to break the unnatural quiet. Then I saw the lights. They were perfectly aligned at first, a precise formation that somehow felt wrong. When they moved, everything changed. The line disintegrated in an instant, lights shooting out in impossible directions, faster than any drone or plane I'd ever witnessed. They zigzagged wildly, some darting straight up, others vanishing sideways into the low-hanging fog. My heart raced. I stood frozen, watching the sky empty itself of these strange lights as quickly as they'd appeared. After a moment, I started jogging again, slower now, constantly looking back. The water remained flat and gray, with nothing to suggest what I'd just seen. I cut my run short, hugging the road instead of the trail. My shirt clung to my back, despite the short distance. Every shadow between houses seemed darker, more menacing. When I reached my apartment, I locked the door immediately. Later that morning, barely after sunrise, I sat at my kitchen table with a glass of water. I stared out the window, half expecting those lights to reappear above the parking lot. Weeks passed before I ran by the lake again. When I finally returned, everything seemed normal. Birds called loudly. Fishermen were out early. Joggers passed with earbuds in. But each time I reached that specific spot, I'd slow down unconsciously, scanning the horizon. The lake looked unchanged, yet I couldn't forget those lights, perfectly lined up before scattering like sparks into the fog. Weeks later, a different strange encounter would shake me. My dog B, a shepherd mix who never barks without cause, went absolutely wild in the middle of the night. This wasn't a casual warning about a nearby raccoon. This was deep, furious, non-stop barking. I sat up and checked the clock. 2:43 in the morning. The night was warm for late August, with a damp air lingering from the earlier storm. Clouds had mostly cleared, leaving a hazy veil over the fields. Bo was going crazy, barking unlike his usual self, facing the cornfield instead of the woods or fence line. I pulled on my jeans and boots, grabbed the flashlight, and stepped onto the porch. Something caught my eye. A bright white light, about 200 yards out, moving low over the corn. It wasn't like a truck's headlights. No engine sound accompanied its movement. The light glided smoothly, just above the corn stalks. Bo was straining against his chain, barking so intensely, his front paws lifted off the ground. I called to him, but he didn't respond. Holding the flashlight tight, I started down the porch steps. I wasn't sure what I intended to do. Maybe check for trespassers. As I approached, the light's behavior grew more peculiar. It moved with an unnatural precision, floating perfectly steady, not swinging or bouncing. About 30 yards from the porch, the light stopped completely. An eerie stillness descended. Bo's frantic barking suddenly ceased mid-growl. The silence was overwhelming. I could hear my own breathing. Instinctively, I raised the flashlight and clicked it on, pointing directly at the light. In an instant, it vanished. Not gradually, but straight upward, as if yanked by an invisible string. No acceleration, no build-up. Just gone. I stared. craning my neck, but it disappeared too quickly to track. Bo whimpered softly, the first sound since the light's departure. I walked to the corn's edge, but didn't enter. The rows were wet from the storm, heavy with the smell of damp stalks. My flashlight swept the tops, expecting to see something. Broken corn, movement, anything. Nothing. No insect sounds, no rustling. The entire field remained absolutely still. Here's the rewritten text. The cornfield around my house had been silent, until it wasn't. That first night, I lingered outside longer than planned, scanning and listening intently. Bo pressed against my leg, his body tense and ears pinned back. Sleep was impossible. Days later, I walked the field methodically. The rose bush, where I'd seen the strange light, showed no signs of disturbance. Soft, rain-soaked soil held only my own boot prints. All day, theories churned in my mind. Maybe a drone, I thought. Local kids sometimes fly them, but never at night, and certainly not like this. Those drones couldn't move the way this light had, straight up and vanishing in an instant. So I waited, coffee in hand. I sat on the porch past midnight, watching. The air felt thick, humid with anticipation. Bo lay at my feet, quiet but alert. Around 1 a.m., everything changed. Bo suddenly sat up, ears pointed toward the field. The usual night sounds, chirping crickets and croaking frogs, abruptly vanished. Silence rolled across the property like an invisible wave. Bo growled low in his throat. No light appeared, but the stillness was profound. I stared until my eyes burned. Flashlight gripped tightly. Nothing happened. Then, as quickly as it had fallen silent, the night sounds returned, like someone flipping a switch. A few nights later, the scene repeated. This time, I was reading in the kitchen when Bo erupted into frenzied barking. Heart racing, I grabbed the flashlight and opened the back door. There it was again, that same white bright light hovering above the corn. I froze. Some instinct kept me from rushing out. Instead, I watched, breathing carefully. The light paused, almost exactly where it had before. Then it moved, sliding sideways with impossible smoothness before stopping again. Bo's barking continued until I called him back. He refused to come inside, instead pacing and growling near the porch. The light drifted to the field's far end and lingered. For a moment, I expected it to shoot upward. Instead, it simply dimmed, slowly fading like a dying bulb. 10 seconds later, it was gone. No sound. No trace. Another sleepless night followed, and I kept the experience to myself. I'd kept the encounter to myself. Not a word to Carl next door, not even to my sister when she called that weekend. The explanations and dismissals were something I wanted to avoid. Every morning I walked the fields. Every night I scanned the sky. B had gone off a few times in the middle of the night. But when I checked, nothing was there. Sometimes the silence rolls in thick, the kind that plugs your ears without a trace of light. Still, the flashlight stays by the door, and I've developed a habit of checking the corn from the porch before bed, just in case. It was nearly midnight when Amanda and I walked back from her friend Rachel's place. The apartment was about a mile away, and the cool early September air made the walk seem perfect. A light breeze swept through, and the clear sky stretched overhead. The neighborhood sat quiet. Rows of small houses with neat hedges, a few street lights. Distant dog barks breaking the stillness. Sycamore Street was always darker, trees blocking the street lamp's glow. That's when we heard it, not loud but steady. A low hum, unlike anything mechanical, deeper than an air conditioner, softer than a power line's buzz. It was the kind of sound you feel in your chest near a big generator, except stretched out and coming from above. Do you hear that? Amanda stopped, tilting her head back. I heard it too, though I hesitated to acknowledge it at first. My mind raced. Was it just ear-ringing? But her question confirmed I wasn't imagining things. We looked up. Initially, I thought my eyes were deceiving me. The sky blazed with bright stars in the crystal clear air. But directly above us, a patch of sky seemed to vanish. Not obscured by clouds or branches, just absent. As my vision adjusted, I realized it wasn't empty. A triangle, perfectly straight edges, each side cutting sharp against the night sky, blocking the stars behind it. No lights marked its passage. No glow, no running lights, like an aircraft. If not for the missing stars, it might have been invisible. The hum grew clearer as it moved, gliding smoothly above the treetops. Massive, steady, unmoving. Amanda's grip tightened on my arm. What is that? The triangle stretched over rooftops, swallowing the entire street from our perspective. We stood motionless, the hairs on my arms rising not from any breeze, but from an unsettling feeling. Something this massive shouldn't move so silently. It's blocking everything, I whispered, and Amanda gripped my arm tighter. The craft crept along the street with an eerie deliberateness. I kept expecting jets, flashing lights, anything that would make sense. But there was only a steady, low hum vibrating deep in my chest. Without conscious decision, we started walking, matching its pace. It stayed directly above us, moving in the same direction. We weren't centered beneath it anymore, just under one of its edges. Yet it still dominated half the visible sky. At the next corner, Amanda pulled me toward a street lamp, as if familiar light might offer some comfort. The lamp buzzed and flickered, dimming like a dying bulb. Her nervous laugh held a sharp, anxious edge. Crossing the street, we noticed the absolute silence. No cars, no barking dogs, no insects. The entire neighborhood seemed drained of sound, save for that persistent hum. I tried rationalizing, military testing, and experimental stealth aircraft. But nothing explained the profound quietness, how close it felt, the void it carved through the starry sky. At the next block, we paused. The triangle continued its steady movement, rotating effortlessly without tilting or changing altitude, a clean mechanical pivot. Now it was drifting diagonally across the neighborhood, heading toward the open fields beyond Lincoln Avenue. We watched it move, its edges razor sharp, the hum gradually fading. Slowly, stars began reappearing behind it, blinking back into place, as if nothing had ever interrupted the night. "It's gone," Amanda whispered. But I kept staring. Seconds of silence passed before the world suddenly resumed. Crickets, chirping, a distant dog barking, the low rumble of a car. It was almost too normal, like someone had simply pressed play after a momentary pause. We walked the rest of the way to my apartment in silence, Amanda holding my hand tightly. The summer before my junior year, I was 16 and living in a Toledo suburb. Nothing special, just another neighborhood with split-level houses and sidewalks cracked by tree roots. My nights usually followed the same pattern. I'd wander the block late, headphones on, trying to clear my head. This particular night was humid and quiet. Probably around 11 o'clock, I was sitting on the curb outside our house, scrolling on my phone, when something strange started happening. The streetlight above me began to dim and flicker. At first, I thought it was just old wiring, something that happens sometimes. But then the next light down the street did the same thing, and then the next. I pulled out my earbuds and watched. Every single street light on the block pulsed simultaneously, like they were connected to one massive switch. This wasn't random flickering. It was synchronized, dimming, and brightening in a perfect 5-second rhythm before returning to normal. I stood up, phone still in hand, and slowly turned around. The neighborhood felt unnaturally silent. No cars, no insects, nothing but my own breathing. That's when I looked up. At first I thought it was a cloud passing over the stars, but the edges were too sharp. It was a shape, a solid, massive shape, moving so slowly I could track it without moving my eyes. Completely black, darker than the sky itself, it blotted out the stars in a perfect line. I stood frozen on the curb, mouth open. The shape stretched across half the block, sliding silently overhead, like a piece of night peeling away. I kept waiting for some sound, a plane, a blimp, anything. But there was nothing, not even the faintest rush of air. My fingers gripped so tightly they went numb. When we finally got inside, I locked the door out of pure instinct, knowing a lock wouldn't stop whatever we'd just seen. Later, lying in bed, I kept thinking about those sharp edges, that black triangle consuming the starry sky. I waited to hear the hum again, but only heard the ringing in my ears and Amanda breathing beside me. We didn't say a word, both wide awake in the thick, heavy silence. A strange pressure filled my chest, making the air feel thick and heavy. Goosebumps crawled up my arms, despite the muggy evening. Streetlights flickered in perfect unison, and for a split second, I was sure the shape paused, as if it had noticed me. Without thinking, I crouched low on the sidewalk. My phone slipped from my hand, clattering against the concrete, but I didn't reach for it. My eyes remained locked on the sky. The shape glided forward, spanning what seemed like an entire block. From my vantage point, it stretched between rows of houses, and I couldn't determine its height. Was it just above the rooftops, or far higher? The complete silence made it impossible to judge. Running inside crossed my mind, but something held me back. Moving felt dangerous, like drawing attention might trigger something terrible. So I stayed frozen, muscles tense, hands pressed against the warm concrete. Every nerve was alert. When the shape reached the street's end, stars reappeared gradually like someone slowly lifting a sheet from the sky. The street lights flickered again. 3 quick pulses, then steady. And then it was gone. I remained motionless for a long time. Sweat cooled on my neck. When I finally stood, my knees cracked as if I'd been crouched for hours. My phone lay on the sidewalk, its screen now cracked. I turned slowly, scanning every house and shadow, half expecting someone else to have witnessed what I'd seen. But every window was dark. No one was awake. No one else had noticed. Inside, my mom slept on the couch, the TV murmuring softly. I wanted to tell her something, but the words stuck in my throat. What could I even say? Instead, I sat in my dark bedroom, staring out the window at the streetlight. Waiting for another flicker, it never came. The block looked completely normal. The stars seemed unchanged. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something massive had passed directly overhead, and I was the only one who knew. The desert traps heat like a furnace, radiating warmth back long after sunset. My truck's air conditioner was barely functional, windows cracked in a futile attempt to find relief. I was driving past Rice when something caught my eye in the side mirror. Initially, I mistook it for Venus, a bright, steady point low on the horizon. But with each glance, something felt off. The light remained constant through every curve and straight away, hovering just over my left shoulder, glowing an almost white color. I tried to dismiss it, turned up the radio, kept focus on the road, convincing myself it was just my mind fixating on a distant planet during a long drive. Yet each time I checked, the light persisted. The dusk was eerily uniform, a pale, flat light with no stars, just a faint orange line where the sun had disappeared. Everything else was a washed-out blue. This single point seemed alien, out of place. After about 20 miles, curiosity took over. I tested the light, slowing down, speeding up, even swerving slightly within my lane. Nothing changed. Whether cresting a hill or dipping into a low stretch, the light remained fixed, as if tethered to my truck. I pulled over. The roadside was a sparse landscape of gravel shoulders and creosote bushes. Gravel crunched under my tires as I parked. I hoped the light might slide past, revealing itself as a mere coincidental alignment. But when I stepped out and shut the door, the desert fell silent. The light hadn't moved an inch, leaning against the truck. I stared upward. Heat from the asphalt made the air shimmer, yet the light cut through with unnatural clarity. White, sharp, impossibly steady. I cupped my hand over my eyes, trying to gauge its distance. No clouds, no reference points. Just open desert. Yet something felt unnervingly close, as if the distance might shrink if I concentrated too hard, and absolute silence enveloped me. Normally, desert nights buzz with crickets or whisper with wind through brush. Now nothing, just that unwavering light, watching. The desert silence was punctuated only by my truck's cooling engine and my own breath. Something felt wrong standing under that light. Without fully understanding why, I climbed back inside, slammed the door, and started driving. Each time I checked the mirror, the light remained perfectly positioned, as if it had been waiting. I accelerated, hoping to escape the unsettling sensation of being watched. No matter how fast I drove, the light maintained its precise location. About 10 miles down the highway, another car approached. As its headlights crested the hill and passed me, I noticed a slight shift in the light, just a tiny flicker, like something had disturbed it. Once the other car's taillights vanished, the light snapped back into its original spot. My stomach churned. I pulled over abruptly, gravel spraying beneath my tires. Shutting off the headlights and engine, I sat in complete darkness. The desert absorbed sound quickly, as it always does. The light hovered steadily, unchanged. I rolled down the window and craned my neck outside, looking up without the glass barrier. Still no movement, no sound, no variation. Time seemed to stretch. 5, maybe 10 minutes passed. The sky darkened, and stars began to emerge. What truly unnerved me was how these stars softly twinkled and shifted, while that single light remained completely static. Eventually, I started the engine again, headlights illuminating the brush as I returned to the road. I couldn't help checking the mirror repeatedly. Each time, the light waited, locked in its position. As I approached 29 Palms, town lights began bleeding into the sky. Street lamps, gas stations, and neon signs creating a hazy glow against the darkness. One final mirror check revealed the light was simply gone. Not faded, not drifted, just vanished. Shaking, I pulled into my driveway. Stepping out, I scanned the sky, searching for any trace. Only ordinary stars scattered across the night, exactly as they should be. The quiet darkness of eastern Nebraska stretched out before me, a landscape of frost-covered cornfields under moonlight. Driving home after a late hospital shift, I was Lisa, 28, cutting across county roads to save time, a decision I'd soon regret. The first hint something was wrong came from the radio. Even though it was off, a faint static hiss filled the car's cab, vibrating eerily in my teeth. I checked the knob, confirmed it was off, but the sound persisted. Outside my car, the static seemed deliberate, not like normal interference. I pulled over to the shoulder, heart thumping. The fields lay black and silent around me, a few distant farmhouses dark against the horizon. When I cut the engine, the static continued, which felt distinctly unnatural. Then I saw it. At first, I thought it was a deer, a light hovering about 2 feet above the road, not a headlamp or reflection, but a pale bluish-white orb, suspended in what seemed like a bubble of air. My headlights shouldn't have illuminated it from that angle, and strangest of all, it cast no shadow. When I slammed on the brakes, the thing moved differently from any animal. It didn't dart or bolt, but drifted slowly across the road, perpendicular to my car, with no sound and no apparent air movement. I was frozen, pulse hammering, staring at something that shouldn't exist. A light that moved when I moved. A silence in the desert too deep to be natural. Blinking faintly in the haze, I knew what I'd seen, something that absolutely should not have been there. The night stretched around me, cold and impossibly still, with only that strange light and its persistent shivering static as evidence of something beyond my understanding. My car engine hummed loudly, heavy with my growing unease. Something caught my eye out in the darkness. I needed a better look, so I reached for my phone, pulling out a cheap stabilizer mount from the glove box. The moment I moved, radio static exploded in my head, not loud, but overwhelming. My hands trembled, almost dropping the phone. When I turned back to the road, everything had vanished. Just empty asphalt, frost sparkling in the headlights, as if nothing had happened. But the static remained, low and persistent, pulsing with each heartbeat. I tapped the dashboard, twisted the radio knob, off and off again. Still, a faint hum lingered. I could feel it vibrating through the steering wheel, beyond the radio itself. Carefully, I eased forward. The road curved gently left, and there another light in the distance, smaller and less defined. It drifted quietly across the fields beside the road. I stopped completely, just watching. The light paused, seeming to notice me. Then it lifted slightly off the ground and vanished behind a tree line. No sound, no motion, just gone. I thought about, but when I grabbed my phone, something was wrong. 12% battery, yet no signal. Even the GPS had frozen. My location pins stuck motionless on the highway. I tried to rationalize what I'd seen. A drone? A flare? Farm equipment? Nothing made sense. No trail, no typical hum, no expected motion. How could a drone create static through a dead radio? Cautiously, I started moving again. At the spot where the first orb appeared, the air felt different, not colder or windier, just heavier, like tension. I could almost touch. Radio static flared briefly, and a faint bluish shimmer flickered off the left shoulder before disappearing. About a mile down, another quick, pale flash blinked out among the trees. I slowed, watching intently. I was driving alone, the road stretching out before me, silent and dark. Something caught my eye, a fleeting shimmer on the frosty asphalt that might have been a hallucination. Static crackled intermittently, pulsing with a soft hiss and an occasional faint glow ahead. Each time it appeared, it seemed synchronized, yet completely unpredictable. 10 miles down the road, everything vanished. The strange lights disappeared, the static faded, and suddenly everything felt normal. My radio worked, GPS updated, phone signals returned. At a stoplight, I gripped the steering wheel, wondering if I should just go home and forget what happened. The remaining 40-minute drive to my Lincoln apartment was eerily quiet. Empty roads, flickering streetlights. I kept checking mirrors and scanning the sky, even knowing how irrational I was being. Occasional distant cars provided the only sense of normalcy. Inside my apartment, I locked the door and sat on the couch, staring out the window. Frost covered the rooftops, stars bright and sharp. Despite the calm, an unsettling feeling persisted. Something had been watching me, moving in ways beyond comprehension. I haven't told anyone the full story. Who would believe me? I wish I could explain the precise details. The static, the strange drift, the complete silence. All I have is an uneasy memory and the haunting thought that something might still be out there, waiting along some dark road where lights are faint, and the radio hums just slightly off. The harbor buoy clicked softly in the distance, its rhythm blending with the old bait and stillness around me. Suddenly, the background noise vanished. The gradual silence was so subtle, I nearly missed its transition. One moment, distant engines hummed, and a gull called out. The next, everything went quiet, as if someone had pressed mute on the world. My neck tingled. The gull's cry stopped mid-echo and didn't restart. The buoy continued its distant clicking, but sound seemed stretched thin, pulling away from me. Almost reflexively, I turned the radio dial, seeking companionship more than anything else. Static filled the speaker briefly. Then a low cello-like tone emerged beneath the hiss. No voices, no stations. When I switched it off, a faint static seemed to linger in the air itself. Leaning over the side, I noticed the water's surface unnaturally flat, like black glass. Binoculars in hand, I scanned the horizon. Nothing stirred. No lights, no boats. Just the distant black tree line and scattered town lights. Even the sky traffic felt unusually sparse. I tried convincing myself I was being dramatic. Perhaps a distant squall was compressing the sounds, or my tired brain was playing tricks after a long day. I settled in, checking lines and adjusting drift. My watch read 10:05. Salt cooled on my neck. Then something extraordinary happened. A streak cut across the sky bright as a cigarette thrown from a great height, falling with familiar meteor-like speed and brilliance. At first, it looked like countless shooting stars I'd seen before. White, fast, leaving a long trailing tail. I raised my binoculars instinctively, tracking its descent toward the water off my starboard bow. A surge of excitement rose. Shooting stars meant good luck. After all, just another fisher superstition to pass the night. But then everything changed. The streak didn't just fall or fade. It stopped, completely, suspended mid-trajectory, as if someone had pressed pause on the sky, hanging perhaps 30 Ds above the horizon, defying every natural law I understood. The sea was empty, just black water and distant lights. When a white point caught my eye through the binoculars, it hung motionless, no tail or dust around it, just a sharp shard of light. At first, I thought it might be an afterimage from eye strain, so I blinked hard. The light remained. I cut the outboard motor, letting the skiff drift with the current. Silence wrapped around me, thicker now. Radio static flickered and dropped to a low cello tone. Grabbing my phone from the dry bag, I tried to film despite the usual lack of signal. The screen captured a black horizon and scattered lights, with a bright white pixel in the upper right, matching what I saw. Then it moved, not downward, but in a sudden, jerky motion, like a cursor being dragged and snapped at random angles. Right, left, down slightly, then sharply up. Each movement was violent enough to make me flinch, yet no sound accompanied it. No wake disturbed the water's surface. The motion felt deliberate, not random. Short, straight trajectories, with small pauses. Then another burst of speed. It paced within my vision, zigging around, as if mapping something in the dark sea below. At one point, it dipped closer to the water. An old animal instinct narrowed my world, my hands wanting to move. I leaned forward, heart racing. The light slowed, hovered momentarily, as if considering something, then shot upward in a clean line. For 5 heartbeats, it hung perfectly still, so close and bright. It made the boat's scuppers glitter white for an instant. Through the binoculars, I saw a pure white point, no edge, no glow, just a dense concentration of light. My brain tried to categorize it like a headlight or flare, but something read wrong. It didn't flare or fade. It simply held, defying explanation. It vanished as quickly as it appeared. No curve, no arc, just a flat, impossible acceleration straight across the sky, until it disappeared. One moment a smudge, the next nothing. No contrail, no lingering streak. Where it had been moments before was now simply empty. Sounds returned like water filling a dry room. A distant motor hummed. Laughter drifted across the harbor. A gull circled lazily, searching for an easier spot to rest. Radio static cut out abruptly. My phone showed the recording. The last frames looked like a camera glitch. A light suddenly gone from one black sky to the next. But I had felt it. The angular movements, the pause, the impossible sprint. That feeling remained. I sat for hours, salt drying in stiff lines on my hands, legs aching from my cramped position. Explanations ran through my mind. Satellite re-entry, improbable debris, a military training flare. I tested each against what I'd witnessed, and none fit. The zigzags defied normal flight control. They were wrong for anything bound by gravity, unlike a typical meteor. No sound, no heat signature I could detect, just a white precision in motion. When I finally started the motor and headed back to the harbor, the town seemed different. Softer, muffled by distance. People on the shore wrapped in blankets, pointing at me, as if I'd been sky-watching too. Their faces wore that small, skeptical smile reserved for the climax of a campfire tale. At the dock, the fish house glowed with light. A few men were unloading a late catch. I tied up, sliding the painter over the post, my hands steady enough to work. I told them what I'd seen. Fishermen trade stories like currency. They measure truth by how it affects their business or social standing. I could anticipate their responses. Probably a plane, satellites, fatigue playing tricks. Some would offer practiced skepticism. Old Pete, who'd launched boats during my childhood, simply scratched his chin and said, "You ever see one again, tell me." That night, sleep eluded me. I cleaned gear until my fingers ached, knowing that action helps quiet and restless mind. As dawn spread its pale light, I rode my bike home, the mysterious sight still burning in my memory. The night had been ordinary at first, flying my Piper Cherokee over the flat plains outside Amarillo. I was just another pilot doing a routine flight, 35 years old, with over a decade of small plane experience. I'd done countless night cross-country trips. This was supposed to be another quiet journey home to Locke. I'd taken off late, around 10:30 p.m., with the sky clear and cold. City lights were just a thin smear on the horizon. At 6,500 feet, everything felt predictable. The Lycoming engine hummed steadily under the nose, and the world below seemed vast and unremarkable. But something changed. One precise white point appeared, hanging in a way that defied explanation. It moved with impossible speed, making faceted turns that made my skin tighten. The silence before its arrival was profound, and when ordinary sounds reopened, everything felt subtly altered. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the memory. I'd scan the sky, check forecasts, look for anything that might explain what I'd seen at the harbor. People smiled and stepped around my attempts to discuss it. The buoy clicked its predictable rhythm, and the ocean kept its counsel. I went back out a few times, anchoring and staring at the spot where it had been. Salt in my nostrils, lines in the water. The more I tried to pin down that night, the more slippery the memory became. One moment of pure, angular patience, how it hung, how it jerked, how it left in a single clean motion. By dawn, the world would rearrange itself into routine. Coffee, counting bait, small talk at the harbor. The town's morning business rolled on, as if nothing had happened. But I knew what I'd seen. A star that stopped mid-fall arranged itself like a careful machine, and then departed as if it had urgent business elsewhere. I don't have an explanation. Only the memory, only the knowledge that I came home alive, tied the boat, and went inside, and that something extraordinary had touched the ordinary night, leaving nothing but a persistent itch in my chest. Autopilot steady when something caught my eye. A light appeared, initially looking like a star. But this was no star. It moved, barely perceptible, almost matching my pace. I scanned my instruments carefully. ADS-B showed nothing. Radar was clear. Turning fully toward the side window, two more lights emerged, forming a triangle behind my left wing. Bright white, intensely luminous, yet not harsh. I flicked my landing lights experimentally, wondering about potential reflections or nearby aircraft. Zero response. Radio check. I reported my position and asked about traffic. The controller sounded puzzled. "Darren, you're alone out there. No traffic near your altitude." I double-checked my GPS coordinates. Still nothing. The lights began moving in perfect synchronization with my aircraft. A slow right turn revealed their precise adjustment. They maintained impeccable spacing, following some unseen rule. My stomach tightened. Not fear, exactly, but a keen awareness of my vulnerability in this vast sky. Cockpit lights on, then off, trying to get a clearer view. The lights look sharper now, more defined. No navigation blink, no standard collision strobes. Just a clean, almost clinical brightness, persistently following. Climbing, descending. They matched every move. Estimated distance, 30, maybe 50 feet horizontally. Close enough to track instantly. Instruments checked obsessively. Altimeter steady. Airspeed normal. No unusual turbulence. Another radio call, voice wavering slightly. "I'm seeing 3 objects off my left wing, moving with me. Can you confirm?" The response remained unchanged. Negative, Darren. You're alone. I contemplated turning back toward Amarillo, maybe descending for a different perspective. But something held me back. Their coordination was too perfect, their presence too deliberate. Just my breathing in the headset. Alone, yet not alone. The engine's hum intensified. Or maybe my heightened senses were amplifying every sound. A flicker of movement caught my eye near the left wing. One of the lights accelerated briefly, then returned to its original position. The motion was smooth, precise, far too quick for any conventional aircraft I knew. I thought about switching my transponder to a different code, hoping to force them onto ATC radar. The moment I did, the lights blinked in perfect synchronization and spread slightly, forming a wider triangle while continuing to move alongside me. My pulse raced. Rationalization kicked in. Was this another pilot playing games? A rare atmospheric phenomenon? Something else entirely? I radioed ATC again. Darren, aircraft, 6598. Lights still with me. 3 bright lights off the left wing. Darren, we're still showing nothing. No other traffic. Can you see any shapes? Just lights. No shapes. No sound. Just lights moving with an unsettling awareness. A long pause followed, punctuated by faint typing. Maintain your course and altitude. Report any changes immediately, the controller instructed. I complied, climbing to 7,000 feet to test their response. They followed perfectly, adjusting with uncanny precision the moment I leveled out. My stomach tightened. No wings, no fuselages, just brilliant white points of light. I tried every test, toggling landing lights, flashing strobes, even gently waggling the plane. They mirrored each movement flawlessly. Deciding I'd had enough, I headed back toward Amarillo, keeping the plane steady. The triangular formation remained constant, defying my expectations of them vanishing. At 500 feet, hoping the haze might obscure them, they climbed in sync, maintaining their formation. Over open farmland, I switched off unnecessary avionics and took a deep breath. Okay, Darren, you're in this sky alone, I muttered, trying to calm myself. I'd never seen anything like this. Not drones, not aircraft, nothing. Then, almost imperceptibly, they began to drift back. My hands gripped the yoke tightly, white-knuckled, for reasons I couldn't fully explain. The remaining 30 minutes back to Love were silent. I flew steadily, alone according to my instruments. But the memory of those lights, their perfect pacing and smooth precision, stayed with me. They had pulled back slowly, widening the gap between us until they vanished without a trace. No streaks, no contrails, no sudden flashes, just the empty night sky. Perfectly normal. I radioed ATC, my voice tight. They're gone. The response was simple. All quiet on radar. When I landed, I taxied in slowly, trying to rationalize what I'd seen. Reflections? Rare atmospheric optics? Perhaps an optical illusion at the edge of night vision, but their movements didn't make sense. They responded exactly to my altitude, speed, and maneuvers in a way that defied explanation. On the tarmac under dim apron lights, the wind stirred the cold night. I looked up at the familiar stars, unable to shake the feeling that whatever was out there had been fully aware of me. Walking to the FBO office, I was torn between hoping someone else had witnessed something and hoping no one had. The office was quiet, fluorescent lights humming. The attendant smiled. Late night? Yeah, I answered flatly, my mind still half in the air. Very late, driving home through nearly empty streets. The sky looked ordinary. Wind brushed through trees. At home, I made coffee, checked my plane one last time, and sat on the porch staring upward. Nothing moved. No lights, no hum, just the distant city glow. I still don't know what I saw. I can't explain the precision, the awareness, and part of me doesn't want to. The next morning, I woke to a soft, steady light in the room. For a moment, I thought I'd left a lamp on, My bedroom had an overexposed look, like a washed-out photograph. Clothes on the chair appeared as pale ghosts. The hardwood floor reflected a faint sheen. No lamps were on. No TV. I live alone in a 2-story house on the edge of a small subdivision where the road gives out into a woodlot. My name's Daniel, and something was different this night. The nightstand, usually an angry red, was dark. It was around 2:12 in the morning. When I reached for the clock, nothing greeted me. No blinking, no glow. Just a dead black square against the pale room. As I swung my legs off the bed, I noticed the air felt strange, not temperature-wise, but weighted. The house seemed packed into an impossibly tight silence. Gone were the usual sounds. Distant traffic, the refrigerator's steady hum. Nothing remained except the house's tiny settling sounds. Small cracks and pops breaking the absolute quiet. I padded to the window and peered out. A glow washed over the oak trees, unlike anything I'd seen before. This wasn't moonlight. October's moonlight is sharp and everywhere. This was a perfect circle, as if someone had carefully placed a lamp just beyond the tree line. Without really expecting an answer, I said, "Hello," my voice feeling like the only real thing in the moment. Rusty, my neighbor's German shepherd, who always barked at nighttime strangers, was completely silent. A thought struck me. Maybe someone had placed a generator or work light out back, but there was no matching motor noise. No sound at all. I slipped on sneakers and crept downstairs. The hallway light clicked on normally when my hand touched the switch. The living room lamp was off, the TV dark. When I killed the overhead light, the mysterious glow took over, transforming furniture into soft paper cutouts. Through the front window, the street corner light stood ordinary and orange. But its beam stopped short, where the pale light began. The colors refused to mix. It looked like someone had painted a bright, clean circle over the trees with a single brushstroke. I opened the front door cautiously, just a half-inch at first, half expecting someone to be leaning against the porch. Nothing. The wooden steps were dull. The glow stretched across the yard, casting a hard shadow at its edge. The night air smelled metallic, with a sharpness that dried my throat. The faint glow caught my attention, flickering in a way that didn't make sense, not like a campfire or headlight, but more like a soft, rhythmic breathing. When I called out, my voice felt small on the porch. The light responded to my hey by dimming briefly before rising again. I stepped into the yard, and the gravel beneath my shoe seemed impossibly loud against the silent night. Up close, this wasn't any ordinary light source. No bulb, no lantern. Just a concentrated space of brightness with no visible hardware or wiring. My phone camera revealed only a pale gray yard, with the glow reduced to almost nothing. Each tap of the shutter produced nothing but grainy images and the usual orange streetlight spill. Something was wrong. Almost desperate, I called my sister at 2 o'clock in the morning. She answered immediately, her voice thick with sleep. I needed someone to hear me describe what I was seeing. She reminded me she lived 50 miles away, unable to witness the strange phenomenon. When I hung up, the glow thinned again, sending a chill down my spine. I tried the garage floodlight. Nothing. I flipped breakers, but the back porch remained dark. Inside, everything electrical functioned normally. Kitchen lights, hall lamp, the blue glow of the smoke detector, all working. But outside, this inexplicable light persisted, independent of any electrical system. I stood by the fence, hand on the wood, watching. The oak trees at the property's edge moved slightly in a wind I could feel on my face, but not around me. The light now formed a perfect orb above the treetops, so brilliant that I could see branch silhouettes through its intensity. It made no sound, no vibration. Yet I felt a pressure under my ribs, a subtle tightness that defied explanation. My jaw clenched like I was bracing for a massive roller coaster drop. Rusty from next door started whining, a drawn-out, worried sound that made me uneasy. The porch light flickered on at Mrs. Abia. The porch light flickered on at Mrs. Aby, Perry's house, and her shadowy figure appeared in the doorway. Her hair was wrapped in a scarf, and she squinted toward my yard with a questioning look. "Dan," she called out, "everything okay over there?" "It's fine," I responded too quickly. "I don't know." The glow dimmed slightly, causing Mrs. Perry to take another step and peer more closely. She might have been thinking it was a bonfire or a kid with a flashlight, but she said nothing more and went back inside. I considered grabbing the binoculars or climbing onto the shed roof. The idea of walking down the lane to see if anyone else noticed anything beyond the trees crossed my mind, yet my feet remained rooted to the grass, stuck as if by glue. Then, in the middle of the darkness, a new sound emerged. A thin, high note, like someone delicately scraping a wine glass rim. It wasn't loud, but distinctly present, seeming to come from everywhere simultaneously. My teeth felt oddly sensitive. The glow tightened, focusing like a lens. For a moment, I had this strange sense that if I moved closer, the light might be startled, almost as if whatever created it was aware of my presence. "Hey," I whispered. The light drew up, inhaling. Suddenly, it intensified to a bright white that washed down the fence and across the yard. Tiny dust motes hung suspended in the beam like miniature islands. Then, smooth as a hand sweeping a tabletop, it rose above the trees, moving without sound or wind, ascending like a balloon, but without its characteristic wobble. It hovered above the tree line for one long moment. Then, without warning or sound, it vanished. Nothing remained but the ordinary night. As the glow disappeared, neighborhood sounds gradually returned. A distant car, a faint country song, Mrs. and Mrs. Mated, Perry's dog barking twice. My breath seemed thunderously loud in my ears, and I felt small and foolish. I glanced at the nightstand clock, dark and unchanged, just as before. That night a strange glow had appeared outside, leaving just a single blurred frame on my phone's camera. The image looked like nothing more than a smear of film grain. I went inside, locking the door with a finger that felt oddly heavy. Turning on the TV filled the quiet with morning infomercials and ordinary sounds. I tried to rationalize what I'd seen. Searchlight, drone, a neighbor with a lamp, but nothing made sense. The way it rose without disturbing the air, the way it vanished when filmed, defied explanation. The rest of the night passed with me listening to the house's normal sounds, counting refrigerator cycles, like metronome beats. Periodically, I'd creep to the window. The tree line remained black under moonlight, the yard shadowed and unremarkable. By dawn, everything had reset to its usual state. Neighbors resumed their routines. Mrs. Experience of your Perry hung laundry. Rusty barked at a squirrel. For the first time, I considered it might have been a trick of light. Perhaps car headlights, a camera glitch, or a dream bleeding into reality. At work, I said nothing. During lunch, I scrolled through the photos and video, searching for evidence. Only grainy frames remained. Coworkers joked about sleep deprivation, but the day proceeded normally. That evening, walking the dog, I examined the trees outside my fence. Everything looked unchanged. The same oaks, crooked branch, fence pickets, lawnmower, scrape, in the sidewalk. No marks, no scorches, no footprints. Nights now find me standing at the window, watching the dark tree line, waiting for another pulse. Mostly, nothing happens. But days later, Mrs. Perry casually mentioned waking to a strange light, noting Rusty had been restless. Over tea, she shrugged it off. I didn't elaborate. The house remains powered. My nightstand clock works when plugged in. On clear nights, I still trace familiar constellations. And I wait. When I got home, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The clock worked now, and I slept in the same bed where I'd wake up. Sometimes, the room was just plain and dark. Other times, I'd look out the window to find my yard bathed in an unnatural moonlight. Too pristine, too perfect. I'd stand there waiting, hoping the tree line might light up again like that first night. It hasn't happened yet, but the memory of that strange orb and its surrounding atmosphere remains with me, a precise, immovable sensation like a taut thread I can neither pull nor cut. It was an early morning walk with Otis along the Mill River, the kind of gray day where fog softens everything, and the water looks like a smooth sheet of glass. The oaks and stone bridge reflected perfectly, with only occasional carp breaking the glassy surface. Otis was on his leash, nose pressed to the ground, tracking rabbit trails. Something felt off before I saw anything strange. The usual sounds of town traffic were muted, as if someone had draped a pillow over the landscape. Even the gulls were unusually quiet. One called out, and then fell silent. That silence created a low pressure in the back of my head, the same tightness I feel before a storm. Otis stopped at a slight bank drop, standing completely still. His ears were up, staring intently at the water. He wasn't barking or growling, just frozen like a statue. When I looked where he was looking, I first thought a breeze was moving the trees because the reflected branches seemed slightly out of sync. A section of reflection, 3 tree trunks and some reeds, slid subtly forward and then held. It looked like someone had gently nudged the reflection out of place. I laughed nervously, trying to calm myself. Maybe it was light through the fog, or a river current shifting the angle. But then the sky's reflection near the bridge blinked, not like a slow cloud movement, but in a quick, tight way, like an eye closing and opening. The actual sky remained unchanged. I approached the river path, an ordinary morning walk with Otis. But something felt off. The water looked different. A deep brown-black with an unnaturally stiff surface that reflected light like polished metal. I tossed a pebble, a meaningless human gesture, to break the strange tension. The ripples from the pebble were bizarre. They formed a perfect circle but stopped abruptly, as if the water's surface had suddenly hardened. Everything reset instantly. Looking undisturbed, Otis whined, a high-pitched sound that caught my attention. He was looking to me, uncharacteristically seeking guidance. I tightened his leash and continued walking, my steps growing hesitant. The path was deserted. No dog walkers, no movement, just warm driveways and silent cars. The ducks caught my eye next. A line of mallards sat rigidly on the far bank, heads facing upstream in that alert posture. Animals adopt when sensing something humans cannot. They didn't even flinch when a heron took flight. Instead, they shifted in unison, as if choreographed, focusing on a single point in the water. Suddenly, a pale orb emerged. Not splashing, not steaming, just rising smoothly about 2 feet above the surface. Its color defied description, neither warm like a lantern nor cold like metal. A thin, milky white that seemed to thicken the surrounding fog. I stood frozen. Otis's leash pulled taut in my grip. Silence surrounded us, interrupted only by a distant dog bark. The orb hung motionless, creating a perfect reflection on the water's surface. But this mirror was strange, subtly trembling with a low-frequency vibration, while the orb remained completely still. Then it began moving downstream, not drifting with the current, but gliding smoothly. No wind stirred the tree branches. It was the most unnatural movement I'd ever witnessed. The river light washed over stone edgings, and beneath the bridge in quick white strokes, fish emerged, not scattering wildly, but rising and submerging with mechanical precision. An orb drifted down the channel, catching my attention so intensely that I wanted to reach out and touch it, to scoop river water into my hands. This desire felt dangerous. When I stepped toward the bank, the orb seemed to pause, not with wild skittishness, but with a calculated adjustment. It eased slightly left, maintaining a respectful distance while continuing its quiet journey. Almost reflexively, I pulled out my phone to record. Who else would believe this without proof? The screen captured the river, bridge, and a bright pinpoint, where the orb hovered. 10 seconds of footage revealed something different. On playback, the orb transformed into a mere smear, less defined than my direct observation. The audio track registered only Otis's breathing and a twig's crack no accompanying hum or ambient sound. I whispered, "Stay," to Otis, and he obeyed immediately, sitting with a focused intensity that dog owners recognize. His tilted head and alert posture spoke a truth more honest than human expressions. The orb drifted under the small footbridge, disappearing momentarily before reappearing on the opposite side. Part of me yearned to track its path, to prove this experience was real. But the narrow, muddy trail beneath the bridge and an escalating sense of being watched kept me rooted. As the orb passed under an old willow's bare roots, it emitted a faint, rhythmic pulse, like a gentle exhalation. Suddenly, the lane filled with an iron-sharp smell, cold and electrical. It reminded me of the metallic atmosphere preceding a storm's electrical breaker, flip unmistakable and not unpleasant. Otis's back hair bristled, and a man with a stroller approached in the distance. Here's a rewritten version. The river narrowed at the bend, steepening its bank as the orb picked up a fraction of speed. It seemed almost impatient, sliding under the low-hanging willows until it reached the old railway pylons. In one instant, a white circle hovered over dark water. In the next, nothing remained but fog and ordinary gray. A man with a toddler stood on the path, bundled against the morning chill. We didn't speak, letting silence hang between us like a thin membrane. He watched the light pass, and I watched him watching. When the orb vanished, sounds returned in layers. A rooster's distant crow, leaves scuffing in trees, a bicycle bell tinkling somewhere nearby. The light's disappearance left a tightening in my chest unrelated to cold. I checked my phone. The clip showed a smear, then a gap where the light had ended, easy to dismiss as a camera artifact. My hands had steadied enough to grip Otis's leash firmly. I wanted to tell someone, to call the park office or police, seeking confirmation that something unusual had occurred. But the screen showed no signal. A thin band of white letters over black. The man with the stroller turned his head, looking at me one last time with a puzzled expression, like someone witnessing clocks behaving badly. Otis pulled me homeward. The walk felt longer, as if I were carrying the morning ahead of me. Houses awakened around us. A blind opening in a second-floor window, the world slowly stirring. Through tree gaps, the river looked smooth and unremarkable. Ducks bobbed noisily, restored to their ordinary rhythms. Back home, I made coffee by habit, half listening to the kettle. Otis ate as if nothing had happened, then curled up, leaving me to hold the morning's strange residue. I woke to a sound circling my tent. Quick, deliberate steps that didn't match any animal I knew. At first, I thought it might be a fox, those small creatures that tap across ground. But my watch said well past midnight, and the movement had a slow, careful rhythm, like someone testing each patch of earth. My name is Marcus, and I sometimes camp alone because the desert has a way of clearing your head. This night, I was on a broad flat, just beyond a wash in the northern Mojave. The moon had disappeared, and stars blazed so intensely they seemed to light the inside of your eyelids. I unzipped the tent quietly and peeked out. The wash cut a black line across the pale, chalky ground. My headlamp created a small ring of light that revealed nothing, no animal, no glinting eyes. Yet the steps continued, circling my tent with an almost studying cadence. When I stepped out and swept my lamp wider, the wash showed only scrub. I walked a slow circle, white arcs painting the landscape, and noticed the steps pause, then restart from another side. I've camped in places where sounds get explained away by coyotes or wind. But these steps felt different, impossibly light, almost weightless. Each contact with sand made a soft pop, a tiny punctuation. They never crunched like normal footprints. Their pace suggested listening, not walking. The landscape held its breath around me, silent, except for those impossible steps. The night pressed in close, cool, and dry against my face. I sat on my cooler, lamp dimmed, listening intently. Something was moving around my tent. A faint, quasi-regular tapping that circled 3 or 4 times before falling silent. I stayed quiet, not wanting to risk turning a potential encounter dangerous. I tried to convince myself whoever was out there had walked away, but I couldn't relax. My camp stove stayed within reach, and every slight breeze against the tent wall made me tense. Stars peeked through the nylon, sharp pinpricks that seemed unnaturally close. A distant metallic sound, like a thumb sliding along a can's rim, drifted briefly through the darkness. I rationalized it as wind catching an old fence miles away. But after what felt like an eternity, the steps returned. This time, they weren't just pacing. The rhythm traced a slow arc from my cooler, sweeping out into the wash and returning as if double-checking something. Cautiously, I unzipped the tent door just enough to peek out with my headlamp. The beam revealed nothing, just smooth, unbroken sand. I watched and listened, my breathing the only sound. My watch read 2:05. The steps continued, then stopped abruptly. Sleep finally claimed me after 3, but I woke with an unsettling sense of being watched. The tent felt oddly dense, as if the air itself was pressing against the fabric. Unzipping the flap, I found the pre-dawn sky, a flat, pale gray, consuming shadows. The wash lay empty, a blank plain of sand. My dog would have found tracks, but there were none. No animal prints, no tire marks, just my own footprints from checking the perimeter. I boiled water, seeking comfort in motion. Sitting on the cooler, I watched the horizon shift from gray to pink. Only when the sun crested the low hills did I notice something in the sand around me. I woke up to something strange around my tent in the half-moonwash. A perfectly smooth ground interrupted by a precise line of tiny circular depressions caught my eye. These weren't random marks, they were smaller than a thumbprint, about the size of a coin, and positioned with remarkable uniformity. It looked like someone had carefully stamped a neat pattern into the desert's crust. The circles traced a shallow arc that passed close to my tent, dipped slightly away, then mirrored back on the other side. Each depression was a clean, identical scallop in the sand, with no dragging marks or indication of how they'd been created. Crouching down, I ran my finger around one of the circles. The sand inside was packed down, suggesting pressure from above, and an equally clean release. No scuffing marked the rim, no loose sand piled on any edge. These weren't animal tracks. Birds leave troughs, beetles make scratchy lines, and human prints show heel drags and asymmetry. These were perfect, symmetric ovals, placed like deliberate punctuation. Walking the arc, I counted 38 circles on each side, a neat bilateral symmetry. They bent away from the tent at 3 feet and returned the same distance, stopping exactly at the scrub line as if an invisible boundary constrained them. Almost instinctively, I took photos, the witness-making reflex. But the images looked ordinary. Pale ground, a tent, a circle of small coin-like impressions. My phone's resolution couldn't capture the strangeness my eyes perceived. Zooming in revealed only grain, which always unsettles me, the world recording less than my memory. At the edge of the frost run, looking back in the dim rising sunlight, the tiny circles formed a methodical mandala around my sleeping place. The surrounding flat remained completely unmarked. No footprints, no broken scrub, no sign anyone had been there. I considered possibilities. Children with cookie cutters, mining equipment, a punch tool, but dismissed each. The nearest roads were miles away, and no trace of human activity remained. I pulled into the county road and climbed into my truck, taking one last look through the windshield. From the cab, I could see the arcs like faint stitches on the sand, symmetric and patient. Something about the sight felt like evidence you wouldn't be able to describe later, so I snapped a photo. At the ranger station, I described what I'd found. The woman at the desk listened politely, asking standard questions about location, time, and whether I'd left anything. Her tone remained steady. "Animals do funny prints," she said, which somehow managed to be both dismissive and not alarming. She filed my note and offered a map, which I declined. The 2-hour drive home was filled with my mind spinning through possible explanations. A moth with an unusual foot, a bird unlike anything I knew, maybe some human with a hidden punch tool, creating a pattern in the night for reasons they'd never explain. Each idea seemed to fold in on itself. The only certainty was that the sand had been untouched, except for those tiny rings, and whatever created them had moved with a precision I couldn't comprehend. I'd walked the pattern twice that morning, noticing how the desert held its ordinary soundtrack, occasional birds, distant mechanical sounds of semi-trailers. The circle pattern held a quiet geometry, as if someone had measured the sand with a delicate instrument. Back at camp, I packed methodically, almost automatically. There's a practical muscle for taking down a tent before the sun cooks everything. The tent collapsed, poles slipped, nylon folding into its bag like always. But I kept glancing at those little depressions, which remained until I stepped off the flat and started down the wash. That night, I slept in my own bed and made coffee the next morning like always. The world returned to its usual textures: subway noise, neighbors' kids' music, the click of my kettle. Those tiny depressions remained a small, persistent thing in my mind. Over lunch, I shared the story with a friend. He laughed, asked if I'd been drinking, and that was the end of it for most people. For me, it settled into a quiet category of unexpected discoveries, small, ordered, and unexplained. When I examine the photos on my phone, the circles look like ordinary coin impressions scattered across an empty yard. Closing my eyes, I can still trace the arcs etched around where I slept. I recall the sounds from that night, soft, regular taps circling the tent in darkness, not a coyote's howl or boot scuffs, but something methodically testing for noise. Weeks later, I drove past that flat landscape. The wind had already smoothed away any traces, and the desert kept its secrets silently. I returned home, fixed the kitchen sink, mowed the lawn, routine tasks that felt both normal and strange. Whatever had been out there, I'd been close enough to sense something unusual, yet not close enough to comprehend it. The discovery happened in an instant when I lifted the print from the tray. We'd been processing parade photos in the Times darkroom that Sunday evening, knowing Earl Jensen would want fresh images for Monday's front page. Following my usual routine, I lowered the print into the fixer, counted strokes with the tongs, and then held it under the red lamp. There, nestled in the corner above the floats and bunting, with the mayor's hat mid-flight, sat a perfect silver disc. It wasn't a smudge or an accidental crease, but a round, clean brightness, hovering above Main Street. Initially, I suspected a darkroom error, perhaps a pinhole in the enlarger or dust on the negative. Checking the contact sheet confirmed something odd. The same shape appeared on the negative, black against clear, where the sky should have been empty. Earl insisted he'd seen nothing during the shoot, remembering only the crowd, clowns, and Mrs. Faye's. Pennington's float losing its skirt. Strange occurrences had peppered the town that week. The courthouse clock stopped briefly one Thursday morning, restarting a minute fast for no apparent reason. The milkman reported his horse standing motionless in Benson Field, staring blankly for an hour. Friday evening brought a high-pitched whine in the barber shop, making razors vibrate. Old Mr. Hargreaves corroborated the sound, and later, the mirrors held a curious ring of condensation, as if someone had breathed nearby. Here's a reorganized version of the text. Earl and I spent hours examining the negative after Sunday's parade. The day had started normally enough veterans in caps, a school band playing with unexpected precision, children clutching cotton candy. The sky was clear and blue, offering no hint of what was to come. The speed graphic camera Earl had used since the war seemed perfectly ordinary. He'd cleaned the lens that morning, fired the shutter multiple times as the mayor waved. But something was different. A disc appeared in just one frame, completely unexpected. We checked everything meticulously. No scratches, no double exposure, no signs of tampering. The density of the negative suggested a solid object, not a lens flare or random mark. Earl's pride made him uncomfortable with the mystery. I ran the print on different paper stocks, adjusted contrast, held it to the newsroom window. The disc remained round, unobtrusive, yet undeniably wrong. Martin Clean, our editor, asked me to hang it on the proof board. We published it above the fold with Earl's photo credit. What followed was bizarre. People bought the paper, flipped through it, but when asked about the parade, they recalled mundane details. Who waved, who missed the march, but no one mentioned the disc. Lillian from the post office laughed it off. Joe Carver, selling hot dogs on the corner, looked at the picture and saw nothing unusual. Small comments circulated afterward. Someone mentioned the soda fountain lights dimming during the cornet solo. A girl at the bakery claimed her sister's compass had spun momentarily in the town square. These little remarks made the strange seem almost commonplace, a way of making sense of something that didn't quite fit. The small town churned with stories after the incident. Nobody could pin down exactly what happened, but everyone had a piece of the puzzle. Earl's cousin had snapped shots from the courthouse roof, the perfect vantage point to catch anything unusual in the sky. But when he developed the film, nothing showed up. We combed through every camera in town. Kids' brownies, high school yearbook shots, even Mr. Klein's son's photos. Every single image showed nothing more than an ordinary blue sky. Rumors began to spread, first as a whisper, then with the intensity only a small town can generate. Someone claimed a man in a gray suit watched the parade from a second-story window, wearing a knowing smile. Nobody could agree on which building. The library worker mentioned the church bell rang by itself that afternoon. At the feed store, the radio played white noise for a minute before returning to the noon program. As if nothing had happened, people collect these fragments, smoothing them down to make sense of something inexplicable. I stared at the print, feeling it was a private message hidden in plain sight. I sent the negative to a lab in Columbus. The technician was professional, calling a week later to report nothing wrong with the film. No splices, no tampering. Just a genuine image that offered no explanation. Strange occurrences followed. My grandfather's pocket watch, reliable for 30 years, skipped a beat one morning. Pennington's front yard lamp flickered when she walked by, despite being brand new. Once, the barber's neon sign buzzed an extra second before settling into its usual hum. Whispers filled the shop. People wondered if the Times had orchestrated some elaborate publicity stunt. Martin and I weren't interested in spectacle, but the idea took root, spreading like a seed in fertile ground. Earl started keeping a small diary after the paper ran. He recorded the times he'd left the house, the locations he'd been, and the sky's appearance along different blocks. For a week, he photographed the courthouse roof at various hours. We examined a contact sheet under different lamps, comparing densities and grain. Yet every technical approach led to the same blank wall. The disc was on that frame and that frame alone. When I went downtown and asked people if they had seen anything in the sky, any slight gleam or movement, they blinked and said no. Their glances to each other suggested they preferred not to add anything beyond what the paper had reported. Small towns have their methods of smoothing over strangeness. If something goes unmentioned, perhaps it never occurred. This might be how people maintain their world's tidiness. A month later, a state paper journalist called, seeking the story in the negative. Martin refused to sell. He believed a paper's responsibility was to ask questions and print its findings. He was old in the way editors are, meticulous about facts and guided by conscience. We published the story. He confirmed we had done our job. The negative remained locked in the safe behind the desk. Life continued. The 4th passed, and we printed fireworks pictures. Earl kept shooting photographs. Sometimes he'd grumble about the odd frame, then laugh and move forward. Those who purchased the paper that day still displayed it on their mantels. Older men offered theories. Some suggested a balloon, others a light trick. Most workers simply shrugged it into the day's collection of oddities. The county clerk informed me the state police had no sky incident records. Their aircraft, if airborne, would have been documented. Occasionally, someone would glance at the framed front page behind my desk and hesitantly ask, "Did you really see that?" I'd offer a fresh coffee and share what I knew. The negative in the safe, Earl's precise photography, the contact print from that morning. They'd nod politely, then shift the conversation. Their desire to maintain an undisturbed day was evident. I cannot explain the disc. No theory encompasses all the peculiar details. The stopped clock, the radio's static, the horse's refusal to move. All I possess is that single, clear image in a page's corner and the memory of its unexplained presence. Standing under the red lamp, holding the print, thinking the sky had been far older for a second than the town was ready to admit, I hung the print in the back of the office, where the light is steady and the paper dry. People come by, look at it, and some of them ask me why I left it there. I tell them half in jest that a picture is a good thing to keep whether it explains itself or not. My name is Jared Collins. I'm a deputy in a small county up in Missouri, and this stretch of farmland is usually quiet at night. Too quiet sometimes. I was on the night patrol out near East Hollow Road when I first noticed it. It was around 10:30, fog rolling in off the creek, headlights cutting thin lines through it. I'd been on for about 4 hours just circling the back roads when I saw something odd near Miller's farm. At first, I thought the fog was playing tricks on me. There was a light in the field, faint, almost like it was hovering above the ground, moving slowly along the corn. I slowed down, rolled the window down. The air smelled normal, wet dirt and corn. But then I noticed the animals. Miller's chickens, usually loud, pecking and clucking even at night, were all huddled near the coop, but they weren't making a sound. Not one peep. I blinked, rubbed my eyes. Then I saw the cows in the back pasture. They were standing near the tree line, perfectly still, staring at something in the field. Maybe me, maybe whatever that light was. And Miller's dog, Duke, he was at the edge of the corn, hackles raised, refusing to go any further. I stepped out of the car, fog curling around my boots, and I swear I could hear my own heartbeat. I called Miller on the radio. "Hey, Mark, you around?" Nothing. I tried again, louder, still nothing. The farm was quiet, eerily so. I approached the edge of the cornfield, flashlight in hand, and that's when I saw it. A circle, perfect flattened corn in a pattern maybe 15 feet across. The light I'd seen earlier wasn't hovering anymore, but the pattern seemed different somehow. Precise, unnatural. I crouched, shining my flashlight over it. Then I go back to the proofs, the obituaries, the town council minutes, and I do the work of the morning paper. Because bills don't wait for wonder. The disc stays round and small in the corner, waiting, like any ordinary photograph waits to be noticed again. The farm was quiet, eerily so. Corn stalks pressed flat in a perfect circle. No sign of human interference. No tracks, no marks, just an unnaturally smooth depression in the field. Duke growled softly behind me, a low rumble that sent a chill down my spine. My flashlight swept across the landscape, revealing something odd. The animals weren't moving. Chickens stood stock still, frozen in place. Cows remained motionless. Even the barn cat sat unnaturally rigid, head slightly tilted, watching something I couldn't see. I radioed the station. "Unit 5, can you check if anyone's reported anything unusual near Miller's farm?" The response came back distorted, underwater-like. "Negative. Nothing reported." Then silence. Something felt wrong. The corn beneath my feet had an unnatural softness, not wet or muddy, just different. My stomach clenched. Duke whimpered. At the circle's edge, movement flickered in the fog. A shadow, blurred and indistinct, shifted without walking or running. It wasn't fully there. A subtle pressure hung in the air. The flattened corn suddenly rippled like a small wave, moving through the stalks. It didn't rise or flatten more. It just shifted, unsettled. I called Miller. He answered groggily. "Jared?" As I explained. Miller interrupted. "Animals acting funny?" Yeah, I saw that earlier. My cows wouldn't move for hours. Chickens were silent. Duke wouldn't go near the corn. Something had changed the environment, altered the animals' behavior. I walked to the circle's edge, my flashlight cutting through the mist. Shadows dissolved whenever I tried to focus on them. I stayed until 1 a.m., taking notes. The animals remained motionless. The circle persisted. Something was definitely not right. The nights were always quiet at the industrial park, but that morning around 3:30 a.m. felt different. Pushing my mop through the main lobby, the old fluorescent lights buzzed with an uneven rhythm, and the HVAC system's hum made the building feel almost alive. Early September carried a strange temperature, late summer warmth with unexpected sharp edges that cut through whenever a door opened. My headphones played an old country station, helping me ignore the building's emptiness. Something felt off that night, more silent than usual. I'd been experiencing strange things lately, centered around a field near my usual route. It started with a perfectly round circle in the cornfield. When I first saw it, the corn seemed to ripple subtly, almost like it was breathing. Duke, riding low in the passenger seat, kept his ears flat. The next morning, Miller and I returned to find the circle still present, with corn slowly rising and adjusting. By midday, the field looked almost normal, though you could still make out a faint pattern if you looked closely. Animals gradually returned to their typical behaviors. Chickens clucking, cows wandering, dogs running around the pasture. For weeks after, I kept driving past that field at night. New circles would appear, and animals would become strangely silent near them, hesitant and still. The fog, pressure, and shifting cornstalks remained constant. I reported everything to the station, but no one seemed interested. The circles continued appearing, mostly overnight and near the same road stretch. Animals still behaved oddly when close to them. I drive past, glance quickly, and keep moving. I don't understand what creates these circles, or why the corn seems almost conscious. But I know one crucial rule. You don't walk into those circles, not fully. And you definitely don't linger. Whatever's there is, patient and observant. I continue making my reports and writing my notes, trying to sleep at night. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see the circle and hear the animals' frozen silence, all of them waiting, watching. I know if I returned too close, I'd feel that subtle pressure again, the corn's ripple, and whatever it is, would immediately sense my presence. The loading dock was empty, like always, but something felt off when I stepped out of the east side service door to grab the trash. A figure caught my eye, pale and white, moving across the lot in an unnatural way. It wasn't walking exactly, more like sliding, glowing faintly. I froze. The shape was human-like, but wrapped in light or fog. The security lights were steady, and this glow didn't match any of them. Behind a line of trailers, the figure simply vanished. No sound accompanied its disappearance. No gravel crunch, no car engine, nothing. Standing there, I waited for it to reappear. My first instinct was to dismiss it as imagination, maybe a reflection or shadow trick. But a cold, tight feeling in my stomach told me otherwise. I finished my rounds, constantly glancing out the windows. Around 5 a.m., while locking the east doors, I noticed a small car parked on the far side of the lot. No headlights, engine silent. It hadn't been there when I arrived at 11 p.m., and no one was visible nearby. Though unusual, I didn't overthink it. The lot was big enough that people sometimes parked to rest or hide out, as the sun touched the horizon around 6 a.m. Bathing the lot in pale light, I approached my car and stopped dead. Two men stood right by my driver's side. They wore new, pressed black suits and matching hats. Their faces were pale, almost featureless in the dawn. "Morning," one said, his voice unnervingly calm and scripted. "Were the security lights malfunctioning last night?" I don't think so," I stammered, gripping my keys. Everything looked fine. The second man nodded slowly. "Good. We just wanted to check." I've worked the night shift at this park for 2 years, and nothing like this had ever happened before. Usually, the most interesting thing was a raccoon knocking over a trash bin, or some trucker stopping for coffee before dawn. But that night was different. When I finished my rounds, 2 men approached me. They were too calm, too precise. I nodded, my throat dry. They didn't smile. They didn't fidget, just stared, waiting for me to say more. I wanted to tell them about the glowing figure I'd seen earlier, but something about their demeanor made me hesitate. Running seemed like an option, but I stayed silent. I shook my head when they asked if anything unusual had happened. They nodded, said, "Have a safe day," and walked away with an unsettling smoothness, disappearing behind the row of trailers. At home, I told my wife, but she laughed it off as a weird dream or a prank. A week later, I asked a coworker if anyone had been in the lot that morning. He shook his head, suggesting I might have been dreaming. Now, I catch myself driving past the park at night, checking the lot. I've seen strange reflections in windows, shadows moving too smoothly. Once, I thought I saw the glowing figure on the edge of the tree line, but it vanished before I could get close. The lot had been empty. No cameras showed anything out of the ordinary. Yet, I couldn't shake the image of the glow, the way it moved, and the timing of those 2 men's appearance. I haven't seen them again, and I'm not sure if I want to. But every time I pass that lot, something feels off. The lot is always quiet when I walk out at night. Fluorescent lights buzz overhead, and that cold, tight feeling returns. I've been replaying that morning in my head, wondering about the men, the questions, the strange sense that something wasn't right. I drive past slower now, windows sealed, headlights cutting through the darkness. When I park, it's always under a street lamp, just in case. Sometimes, catching a glimpse from the corner of my eye, I see that pale glow sliding across the empty space. The memory of that morning comes back. How the world felt smaller, quieter, like it wasn't entirely mine. I never talk about it at work, but with each shift, each quiet lot I leave behind, I feel the weight of their unseen gaze. Even alone, I can't shake the feeling. It was a night off the northern Maine coast, aboard my 24-foot center console boat named the Minnow. Normally, I'd be back before 10 o'clock, but I had fish to clean, and the nearly full moon provided enough light. The water was eerily calm, almost syrupy, with a sharp cold that penetrated every layer. Just as I finished rinsing the deck, something caught my attention. At first, I thought it was a lighthouse or another vessel, but the radar showed nothing. Then a beam of white light appeared, cutting across the water from above the clouds. It wasn't like a typical searchlight. This was different. Steady, precise, moving as if someone were sweeping the waves with a ruler. I froze. The beam seemed to drain the warmth around it. My teeth chattered, hands going numb despite my gloves. The water beneath the light looked bleached, stripped of all color, not reflecting, like moonlight, but completely altered. I tried to start the engine, my fingers clumsy and slow. Every instinct screamed to escape, yet I remained motionless. The water felt different, colder somehow, and nothing made sense. I was heading back to the marina, keeping the engine steady, trying to make sense of what just happened. The darkness had returned so quickly, thick and wet, like someone pulled a blanket over the ocean. After a strange light had been searching around me, I couldn't tell if the light was looking for me or something else, but it had clicked off without warning. No dimming, no fading, just gone. I sat shaking, staring at black waves, attempting to rationalize. Maybe a helicopter, a weather drone, but there was no noise, not even a distant hum. The waves lapped normally, but their sound felt hollow. I started talking to myself, even cursing the darkness, as if shouting could make it less oppressive. Then I noticed the fog. It wasn't dense, just a thin veil rising off the water, but it moved unnaturally, not swirling, not drifting, just shifting smoothly like it had its own pattern. My stomach told me something was wrong. even as I tried to convince myself my mind was playing tricks. The compass needle confirmed my unease, flickering unexpectedly. Tiny jumps and hesitations that shouldn't happen this far out, with no metal overhead except my boat. I grabbed the VHF radio, hoping to connect with someone, anyone. Nothing but static. But then the static changed, becoming something else. Entirely. A low, even hiss that sounded almost like breathing. Like someone was right behind the speaker, inhaling and exhaling. My heart raced, and I slammed the radio down. Looking up, I saw thick, low clouds with a faint glow barely visible behind them. It wasn't like an airplane light or a buoy marker, just a steady, hovering presence. And then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it vanished. No fade, no blink, nothing. I tried to shake it off, telling myself the cold and fatigue were playing tricks. But something had changed out here on the water, and I knew it. The ocean felt different that night. Something was watching, waiting for a mistake, a presence hanging overhead that never quite disappeared. Every sound seemed magnified. Waves slapping against the hull, a distant gull's cry, the motor's vibration. I was on edge the entire journey back. Halfway through, I sensed a strange shift beneath the boat. The water felt heavier, moving through pockets that weren't waves or currents I recognized. The boat didn't rock, but my stomach knew something was wrong. I slowed down, floating silently, and noticed an unnatural stillness. Even the engine's hum seemed off. The ocean around me had lost its depth, become hollow and muted. When marina lights finally appeared, it was like entering a different universe. Normal, warm, human. I called the harbor master but couldn't explain what I'd experienced. Who would believe a searching light beam cutting across water? Who would understand the fog moving with intention, the compass flickering, the radio hissing like breath? After tying up, I sat in the cabin staring through the window. Everything looked peaceful, quiet. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that the section of ocean I'd traversed had been fundamentally altered, touched by something invisible. I went home, ate, tried to sleep, but each time I closed my eyes, that white light reappeared, sliding across black water with inhuman precision. Always searching. In the morning I checked the boat. Nothing seemed disturbed. The waterline was normal. No signs of anything unusual beneath the surface. Weeks later, I took the boat out again, attempting to retrace my route. Nothing. Just black, indifferent water under moonlight. But the memory remained, its weight pressing down on me. Months have passed, and I still think about that night. Sometimes, in the darkness, I imagine that searching beam sliding across my backyard, relentless and strange. The water that night looked different, drained of color, with a strange fog moving in ways I couldn't explain. Something else was out there, something I couldn't quite understand. Cold air pressed against my skin, and the radio made no sense. A beam of light, precise and silent, had pierced through everything I knew. Since that night, I've changed. My boat stays tied up in the marina after sunset. Day trips are fine, but nothing past the usual routes. When dusk settles and I'm alone on the water, I feel that weight again pressing down, making me keep my head low and my hands steady. I've wanted to tell someone, the Coast Guard, scientists, even a close friend, but who would believe me? Not the way I remember it. The light was real. The cold was real. The silence was real. Everything else is a blur. What haunts me isn't just the beam itself, but the idea that something could exist above the clouds, moving with purpose, unseen, and then simply stop. These moments replay in my mind, flashes when I blink, faint hissing in quiet rooms. Sometimes I catch myself staring at the sky, wondering, it could have been a trick of the mind, a strange weather event, or some unidentified aircraft. But nothing explains everything perfectly. Nothing fits. And that uncertainty, that's what stays with me. I apologize. But the text you've provided appears to be incomplete or unclear. Could you please share the full original text that you would like me to rewrite? Without the complete context, I cannot accurately rewrite the script while maintaining its original meaning.